Hey, hello, good morning everyone. Welcome back to a brand new section of the SwiftUI Core Data course today. Certainly hope you're doing well out there, and I hope you're ready for the next couple of lessons. Now, in the last couple of sections of the course, we pretty much wrapped up with the credit cards feature inside of our application here. Remember, I showed you guys how to add credit cards using the core data database. We also have the ability to edit and delete cards inside of our system. Now, having done all of that, I want to move on to a brand new feature here. And remember, this is the finished version of our application. So let's say I have my red MasterCard here, right? And down below, you see we have a label that says get started by adding your first transaction. And below is a button. I will press on that there. And once I press on that, right, we present a new form that allows us to add a transaction. So let me just kind of go over this example right here with, let's just say Mac Mini M1 for $999. Here is my date picker, and it allows me to kind of swap out the dates like so. And then I have these sections right here, or the category section. And then also I can select a photo by clicking on that and choosing a photo from my image picker controller here. So let's just use the iMac there. And once I have this completed, I'll just hit the save and you should be able to see my transaction. So I'm going to swipe back over to the red card here. And you'll see down below I have my new Mac Mini M1, currently it's showing an iMac. So the transaction for this card right here, you'll see that as I swipe to other cards, the transaction list should look different, right? So I'll swipe over to this card here, the brand new purple. You'll see I have 0 transactions associated with the card there. So when we're talking about database, you'll realize that this kind of relationship is called a one-to-many relationship. In other words, one single credit card can have many transactions inside of our system. And I'll show you guys exactly how to do that in this section here. So hopefully that sounds good. Before we can get this entire feature completed, I first want to work on the UI of our app. This guy, it's simply a brand new form, and inside of our form we have very similar to our other form, the cancel and save at the top right. And then right here we have a section for information. We have the date picker. And today's lesson, I'm just going to leave this right here, many to many, and leave that to kind of this blank page there. And then down below, I'll show you guys how to add a photo picker as well. Probably not in today's video because adding a photo picker using SwiftUI is surprisingly kind of long-winded and long-winded and complicated. So let's see how much time we have today, and maybe I'll show you guys this feature in the next lesson. Okay, hopefully that sounds good. We are ready to head back into our project. So what do we have so far? Well, our main view is rendering out this tab view using this page style here. And you can click on the edit and whatnot. Everything looks okay in my opinion. The way I'm going to start rendering out this feature is I'm going to start with the getting started label there. There's a lot of different places you can put that label, but just for funsies, I'll put it right here. So get started by adding your first transaction like that. So that looks pretty good, nothing too bad with the label. And now I'll work on my adding transaction button. Enter, and this guy will be the text of, let's see, add transaction like so. And down below, I should have something. Let's hit the backspace on the code. And that looks good so far. Some of you guys can probably guess how to render out this black transaction button. The way I'm going to do that is to first give this guy a color of black like so. and you'll see it appear like that. I think in Xcode 13, you can just use .black, but for iOS 14 and Xcode 12 compatibility, it's kind of required for you to use color like that. So hopefully you are aware of that minor detail. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the insets of this guy. And let's use top. I like using 10, 14, 10, and 14. It gives me, good spacing around my button here. And then finally, for the foreground color, you can, maybe use the color of white. That appears okay. But to support dark mode, I'm going to use the color of system background like that. So again, this is just to support dark mode, and hopefully that should be okay. This right here looks like the color has no member system background. And this is always a little tricky. You have to construct it using the color initializer like so. And now the code should be fine. All right, again, that looks pretty good for the background color. I'm going to use .label again, just to support dark mode. And then finally, if you want to change the font, this is quite simple. You can use headline for just a simple headline font that is bold. And then again, you can use corner radius of whatever you want. I'm just going to go ahead and use 5. All right, not bad with all this code. Imagine coding this out using UI Kit. Takes quite a bit of code and constraints, and now using SwiftUI, this feature right here is just very simple to build out. Okay, that being said, I will move on to adding this form inside of my app. How do I do that? Well, to go up here, and I'm going to add a state var should show add transaction form. And we'll set this guy equal to false like that. So I already know that this state variable right here might kind of present some problems later, but we'll solve those problems when we get to it. So that being said, I'll use this guy, and whenever I hit this transaction button, we are just going to say toggle like that. And then finally, you can attach a full screen cover, and let's use the binding of the should show transaction form dismiss. I don't really care about that, so hit enter for content. And let's say add transaction form. Okay, Command Option P to resume my simulator preview. And then I think I can start showing this form here. So click on that. And now it says add transaction form. So not bad, not bad at all. Now what I want to do is I want to start coding out this transaction form. You can go ahead and try to do this on your own, but I'm going to go ahead and hit the file explorer somewhere inside of my code, right? Instead of main, I will try to create a new group. And this group, let's just call it the add transaction, or you can just call it transaction. Doesn't matter so much. I'm just going to call it transaction. Maybe you want to rename that to be consistent, but it's really up to you. I'm going to create a new file. Instead of here, we are going to say add transaction form. Hit the create, and now you'll have the transaction form. It's always a good idea to hit the resume every time you create a new view. That way you can, hopefully get the preview to show up. Next thing I'll do here is I'm going to wrap everything in a navigation view and then use a form. This guy, it should be something. I'm going to say nav title and add, let's see, the string of add transaction like that. Okay, looking quite nice. I can hit the play here. That looks pretty good. For these guys, you might want to use the navigation leading and trailing of cancel and save. Let's just do a private variable right here. You guys are already aware of how to create these guys. And, your button, your action right here. And this guy is that. This guy is something like text and cancel like that. If you want to get the indentation correct, hit Control I. it'll bring that up to the right side. For the actual button for leading, we'll use cancel button, and for the trailing, we'll use a save button. So I guess I'll just copy and paste because that's easy to do. And we'll call this the save. All right. Paste that in here. You should see something showing up in the preview. And hopefully things aren't too bad with this bit of code. Again, using SwiftUI, building out these buttons right here, and the navigation title is super simple. Okay, so just to confirm my cancel button should work, you guys are also aware of using an environment variable, right, to get the cancel working. You can call this the presentation mode and var presentation mode. So presentation mode, that's how you spell it. I think it's something like presentation mode. You don't have to name this variable to be exactly that. You can actually call this whatever you want. But, just for consistency, I like to call it whatever the environmental actual symbol is. So, wrap the value, dismiss, and that's what we get. All right, so I'm gonna now test this form to make sure that the cancel button actually works. The way I'm going to do that is I'm gonna take my add transaction form, go back to my main view, and down below, whenever I present the, the toggle for the add action here, instead of using this dummy text form, let's just use add transaction form. And then finally, whenever we hit the add transaction, namely this black button will present a new form like that, and canceling also dismisses. Again, the cancel works because SwiftUI automatically injects a presentation mode inside of your view when it's appropriate. In this case, we are presenting it, so presentation mode is going to be set to a value that you can dismiss later on. You don't have to worry about how that happens. The SwiftUI framework handles it for you. All right, that said, we are going to move on and try to implement some of the sections inside of our form. How does this work? Well, you can open up a section with the header content. This guy will be information. The content will be, let's use a text field for now. We can use the name, and this is the binding of name. Okay, most of the time you are going to use a private variable. So let's just set it up like that, and I'll hit Command Option P to resume. You should see a new block inside of your form with one field called name. I will hit the space and re-render, and there we go. Nothing too bad, and let's use amount here. And in addition to that, I'm also going to use the date. So right here, we will use date, and just to initialize a new date, we're going to use date like so. And then below, we are going to follow suit with the name, and over here, just use amount for your actual transaction like that. And this is the $ amount. Again, $ just gets the binding variable for your state. Hopefully that's not too bad. And for this, you can use a date picker. Well, we'll just use this one right here. There's a lot of different options that you can pick. This one will be the best one. So let's use the string protocol of date, and for the selection, we'll use the date like that. This guy needs to be date. Lastly, for the displayed components, you can hit dot, and by default, I think it shows the date and the hour and minute. And let me just show you what that looks like right here. So just using the date picker without the actual displayed components, you'll see this appears and the 1116 appears as well. You can click on that, you'll see this picker here. Click on this, you'll see the wheel of time. Lastly, I will show you the displayed components and dot, and just use date like that. You'll see I only have the date. For a typical transaction relating to your purchases or credit cards, you don't really need the time, but if you need the time, just kind of omit this guy right here. Okay, looks good. I will go ahead and construct my second section just to make things work. So for the photo or the receipt of your transaction, you can use a button. So button like that, action, enter for the actual label. Let's just use select photo like that. So the moment that you add a button inside of a form section, like what we're doing here, it's going to automatically have this type of UI rendered out. Namely, we have an entire row and it's clickable. It has a down state, and also the button appears on the left edge in the blue font. This is just the default rendering of your form button. And I think it's consistent with Xcode 12 and iOS 13. So whatever version you're working on, it should look like this. All right, not so bad with what we have so far. The last thing I'll do is I want to show you guys how to create kind of this button called many to many. You don't have to know what this means just yet, but whenever you have this type of form button, this right here should lead you into some other page. For the kind of finished version of our application here, the actual transaction can contain like many different categories. So, we have a category of electronics. Clicking on that will lead me to new sections. So let's just call this the miscellaneous section, and I'll hit the kind of the green button right here, hit the create. You'll see it show up like that. And then clicking on that, we can, modify this color here. So I'll show you guys how to do that later, but in this lesson, I want to kind of wrap up by showing you guys a navigation link. And, navigation link right here. And for this guy, it's always really, really tricky as to which one I need to pick. So there's the destination and label, which is this guy, but I think you actually have to use this one for Xcode 12. Again, if you're using Xcode 13, I recommend that you use this new version of the initializer here. But if you're on Xcode 12, I believe you have to use this one, I think, or it might be the other way around. And let's just kind of pick this one. If I remember correctly, I think this one is the Xcode 12 one. Okay, so hit enter here. And for the label text right here, let's just call this the many to many. For this guy, we'll call this the new category page. All right, so I want to actually try to run this to see if it actually works. And it looks like I was actually correct. This is the Xcode 13 version. So navigation link, and it's actually this one right here. So this is the text of many to many, and this is the actual destination. So, with SwiftUI, the compiler is really, really silly sometimes, and it doesn't help you autocomplete some of the code. I noticed when that happens, it's a good idea to just kind of retype out the code when when you don't have any compiler errors. And when that happens, you can now say many to many like that and hit enter here, and text is test. So once you have this code, it should compile for Xcode 14 or Xcode 12 and iOS 14. But for whatever reason, this doesn't work either. So I'll just call this the text and many like so. And this looks like it doesn't like it either. So I will click on that, hit destination. And this is the final syntax that you need for Xcode 12 and iOS 14. Again, I don't really know why they decided to kind of change the syntax. I believe they want you to actually use a text component in Xcode 12. In Xcode 13, you are no longer required to use the text component. And yeah, it's really confusing, and it took me a while to figure out actually the correct syntax. All right, so once you have this right here, right, this guy should say many to many. You'll see that appear right here. It also has this right chevron arrow. I think this is called a chevron. And if you click on that, it'll lead you to this page here. And you'll see that whenever you click on this, right, you can actually add a title to the navigation view. And how do you do that? Well, you can just say dot navigation title and new title like that. And once you have that, you can click on here and you'll see new title appear on the top left. Okay, let's see. So far with everything we have inside of our add transaction form, things are looking pretty good. And now we are kind of ready to add a transaction inside of our system using core data and a one-to-many relationship. So I'll show you guys how to do that in the next video. And if you guys have any questions for today, let me know down below and I'll answer them as quickly as possible. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hey, hello. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back for another exciting video in the SwiftUI core data course today. I hope you guys are having a fantastic morning, and I hope you're ready for today's video. Now, today's lesson, we are pretty much going to continue where we left off in the last lesson. And basically, last video, I showed you guys how to create this add transaction form. And that form is right over here on the right side preview. We have our cancel, the save, the add transaction, as well as two different sections right below. So information, name, amount, date, many to many, and this select photo button at the very bottom. In today's video, I want to show you guys a photo picker. And every time I tap on select photo, I want to present some kind of picker very similar to this here. I'm going to go ahead and click on select photo, and you'll see whenever I have this image picker controller guy, I can pretty much click on any photo. It'll dismiss the image picker, and then you'll also see the selected photo right below this button down below here. And this is kind of tricky to implement inside of SwiftUI. So I'll try to walk you guys through exactly how to do this one step at a time. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see, add transaction form. Down below is my button that says select photo. First thing we want to do is to present a full modal cover here. The way to do this is very similar to everything that we've done so far. I'm just going to create a state private var should present, let's say, photo picker here, and that looks pretty good. Set that bad boy to false. Finally, let's see, should present photo picker. I believe this error will go away soon, and I think it should be fine. So I'm going to try to resume. The error did indeed go away. And the next thing I'll do is down for the button here, I will say paste and toggle that guy. All right, moving on, I'm going to attach a full screen cover to this guy. Use the binding of should present photo picker. I don't really care so much about the dismiss, so I'll get rid of that. For the content, let's see, what do we want to test out? Well, why don't we say test out this right here? And now I think this form is ready. I'm going to go ahead and click on select photo. That's going to toggle my should present photo picker. And once this guy is true, this binding right here will present this full screen cover, pretty much what you're seeing on the right side. This code is should be pretty familiar to you guys right now. So, if you guys have any questions, make sure to, ask me below. Okay, moving on here. The next thing I want to do is instead of presenting this test out text right here, I want to present a full screen image picker instead. Well, let's see, how do I want to show you guys how to do that? Well, why don't I create some kind of component that wraps a image picker? The way to do that is to create some kind of struct and name it photo picker view. That seems like a pretty decent name. UI view controller representable. It's a really long name, but this guy, it allows you to wrap one of the old UI kit controllers that you can have access to. And once you see the code, it's pretty easy. First thing to do is to implement the two methods that you have to kind of implement here. Make UI view controller. You want to present some kind of controller, right? So the photo picker is going to wrap this UI image picker controller. It's pretty much what you're seeing here with these 6 photos. And then let's see this guy. I'm going to return the actual image picker like that. I think I can pretty much maybe close out of that, give us a little more space. So the next thing to do is you also want to provide something else called the update UI view controller. And then this guy, you don't really need to implement it for our feature here. I guess in other words, you can leave this empty like that and you'll be fine. Okay, moving on here, I'm going to go ahead and use this photo picker view here. I'm going to replace not the photo, but I'm going to replace this text with my photo picker. So having done that, I will relaunch my preview, click on select photo, and now you'll see the actual image picker being returned on line 53. This is just, again, one way to wrap your UI kit controllers and use them inside of SwiftUI. And I think this is a pretty useful exercise to go through because oftentimes you'll have to reuse old UI kit components. So this should help you kind of realize how to do that. Okay, moving on here, what exactly do I want to do with my image picker, right? Well, the tricky thing here is, let's say you have a bunch of photos in your picker, and let's also say that you click on one of the actual images, right? Well, when you click on the images, you'll see that the actual modal will get dismissed, but you don't really have access to this photo anywhere. And the way to actually make this all work, there's a lot of different ways of doing this, and why don't I go ahead and show you the easiest way. So for this photo picker view here, you can create either, let's just use a binding variable. I feel like this is the easiest way of accomplishing this task. I'm going to go ahead and say binding var, and the actual var, right? It's going to be something called a photo data, and I'll declare it as this data optional. And the reason why I'm declaring it as an optional is because when you present this photo picker here, you're not necessarily picking an image yet. And moreover, you can actually cancel, which means that you didn't pick an image at all. So that's kind of why we have optional. And the moment that you declare this photo data binding, you're required to, pass in some kind of state binding variable. So the way I'm going to actually do this is I'm going to go ahead and inside of my add transaction form, I'm going to declare a state var of photo data and let this guy be data optional as well. And they don't have to be the same name, but for consistency's sake, I'm just going to give them the same name. And now photo picker view is going to take in the dependency of this state variable here. All right, and just because I can, I'll add the private modifier to this guy and everything should be fine. So the next question is, with this photo data binding dependency, like what exactly do I want to do with it, right? Well, the thing is the image picker here, you can set something on it called the delegate. And if you look at this delegate, it pretty much allows you to tell when an image is picked or if this modal right here, if this modal is canceled. It also kind of tells you when that happens. And if you hit option and click on this, you'll see the delegate has to conform to this protocol of image picker controller delegate as well as this nav controller delegate guy. I'll show you how this works. And again, this is kind of tricky with this UI kit bridging SwiftUI code. So let's just declare all the necessary code and then we'll walk through exactly what it's doing. Again, I'm going to declare a class called a coordinator, and this coordinator is going to act as my delegate, which means that I'm going to conform to UI image picker controller delegate. Wow, that's a really long name. And this guy, I'm going to set the delegate equal to this coordinator somehow. Now, whenever you do this, the actual compiler is going to flag you and tell you, okay, you've declared a coordinator, but you don't have this function implemented, so it makes sure that you implement this guy. And the moment that you have this function, right, you have to return a coordinator. I'm just going to simply return a coordinator like that. All right, so again, nothing too bad, hopefully. Next thing I'll do is I'm going to paste this code right above this coordinator. The next thing I will do is for this coordinator, right, I can now implement this image picker controller delegate thing. And you can just type in image picker. You have did cancel and did finish picking. And this guy, I think you might want to say the picker.dismiss and dismiss true and nil. So you don't actually need the completion, so I'll remove that. This is when the actual user picks a media or picks an image. And the other one is very similar, so image picker did cancel. And whenever that happens, you might as well implement that as well. And now everything should be a-okay. The next thing I can do inside of did finish picking medium is I can say let image data equals the actual info dictionary here. And the info contains the actual, so let me just hit dot one more time. You can access the edited image, the image URL, the live photo, and all this good stuff. The actual thing that we need is the original image that we picked, right? So I'll just do that. I think you have to cast this as a UI image because it doesn't know exactly what's inside of this dictionary. So you just have to cast it as that. And then finally, with the image data that we have, or this is actually just the image like that. For the actual image, right, we can get some information out of it, such as the JPEG data compression quality. So we are going to be making use of this right here. So I'm going to say let image data equals all that. For the compression quality, just use 0.5 or 1 also works. So with all this stuff set up, right, I need to somehow tell this this image picker here that I want the coordinator to be the delegate that handles the actions occurring here. So the way to do that is to make sure that whenever you create your actual picker there, you can set the delegate equal to something. Well, what is this something? You need to set it equal to this coordinator, which was created by this make coordinator guy. And the way to access that coordinator is to take the property out of this context there, and I will paste that below, and you'll see there's a property called coordinator. So this looks okay. I think the code should be fine. I've typed this code out quite a few times, so I pretty much know exactly how it works. And then finally, okay, before I actually perform the last trick here, I'm going to run this inside of the simulator. This way we can actually see some code being ran. I'm going to run this right here in the iPhone 12 Pro Max, which is this on the right side. And I think it should compile building. Okay, it looks like my M1 processor is somewhat fast today. And now we have this. So I'm just going to create a dummy car right here, allowing me to see this transaction below. I'm going to hit that, select photo, and I'm going to pick a photo like this guy right here. So whenever that happens, I expect this guy to actually hit the breakpoint, but it looks like it was kind of off. So I'll click on that, and you'll see now my breakpoint is being fired. And okay, if you guys are not able to kind of follow through exactly what's happening, basically our photo picker view is being created, and whenever that happens, the photo picker view, it creates some kind of coordinator and it puts it on this context variable later. And then, sometime after that, it decides to create the actual view controller that you want to use. Once that happens, you create your image picker controller here, set up the delegate using the coordinator that you just created, and that means your delegate is now being set to this here. And whenever you pick a photo, it calls this delegate method, hitting this breakpoint on 67. So again, it might be, understandably a little confusing how this works, but as of now, there really isn't an easier way of implementing an image picker in SwiftUI. So this is kind of what we have to use, at least for now. So once I have that, it looks like things are working correctly. Okay, so now that I have, the image data being fired off on 65, I can actually set this photo data equal to the image data. And let's say self.photo data. Photo data equals to the image data here. Now you have to be very careful with this code. And we're inside of a class, or this is actually called an inner class. And this inner class coordinator, it is trying to access this photo data that belongs to the parent class. And this isn't an instance, so it doesn't really have access to this parent variable. The way to grant it access, I suppose, is to just give it an initializer that passes in this guy. And once you see the code, it'll just make a lot of sense. So I'm going to say self.parent equals the parent right here, and I will say private let parent be that guy. All right, so the moment that I have access to the parent, right, which is this guy right here, this is going to ask you to pass in the initializer of parent that you declared there. And this guy, I'm just going to use self here. So the coordinator is now aware of this entire object, which has access to the photo data. And down below here, you can just say .parent. And finally, this parent is accessing this and then accessing that and setting it to the image data below. All right, so again, quite a bit of code, and it seems like the logic is a little circular, but nonetheless, this is actually the code Apple has on their website. So make sure you're able to follow along. Okay, all that being said, you'll see that the moment that I set image data onto the parent photo data, this guy is actually a binding, right? So this photo right here is a binding, and whenever you set this, it actually will set this as well. So it sets this, and it actually affects this guy in the overall grand scheme of things. And whenever this happens, you can actually just set your image right below. So this is my section with the actual photo button there. So select photo. I can say if let's say data equals self.image data. Okay, I think I'm calling it photo data. And I can, inside of here, create some kind of image. And this image, you can use the image with the, let's say you can say init with data. So this is just the UI image initializer. And this guy, you can just pass in the data from line 41. And I think this should be fine. Now, this constructor right here, it actually produces an optional image because the data is not really guaranteed to produce any type of image. So that's kind of why it's optional. I'm going to take this and use another binding up here. And let's just say that equals that. So I'm just taking, the non-optional value of that binding and putting it in here just to be safe. Okay, that being said, I'm going to finally run this code. And you'll see when I click on select photo, let me just stop this and run it. I'm not really sure why, but sometimes it actually stops working in the preview. I'm going to click on, let's say, the waterfall. You'll see the waterfall show up right here. So again, that's kind of how everything works. And when you're sending in a binding through the photo picker view, you're actually sending this variable to the child view, and this guy is able to pretty much control what the parent is doing. It might seem a little confusing, and there's a lot of different ways to actually do this. For example, you might want to declare some kind of callback or a closure inside of your photo picker. That works as well, but using a binding is kind of the more SwiftUI pattern. So I actually recommend using this pattern here. All right, last thing I might want to do here is for this photo, it's extremely large. You don't really want that to happen. Let's use resizable. Finally, pick on the leaves here, and here we go. We get this guy here. Not really sure why the image picker is showing up twice, but that's kind of how we are handling things for now. And this guy, let's say scale to fill, which is always a good modifier to use. I click on that. That guy appears once and twice. I think for the preview that happens a lot. I'm going to try to rerun this code inside of the simulator, and I'll see whether or not that happens. So Command R, run. Things are kind of up and running. Click on the photo, and I'm going to click on that guy right there. And it looks like that's appearing twice. All right, so I'm not exactly sure why this photo picker is appearing twice. One kind of typical workaround that I'll try here is to attach the full screen cover to the button here instead, pretty much instead of the section. When I do that, I feel like the image picker is not going to appear twice. So click on that here. And for whatever reason, when you attach the full screen cover to the section, it kind of doesn't work all that well. So if you ever run into that problem, make sure to just try to attach the cover onto the button itself instead. And when you do that, I guess things work out correctly. So let's try to click on the waterfall here, and you'll see the photo, kind of showing up like so. All right, so that is pretty much what I will kind of teach you guys how to do today. And if you guys have any questions about all of this code down below, please make sure to let me know, and I'll try to answer you guys as fast as I can. Again, passing in a binding to one of these sub view components, that's what the SwiftUI pattern really is all about. So whenever you guys can pass in a binding, I would recommend doing it that way. Sometimes you might want to use a callback closure, but that's more the old way of doing things. There are pros and cons to both approaches, so make sure you give each approach a try and see what works best for you. And that's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao. Hey, hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back for another exciting video in the SwiftUI Core Data course today. I really hope you're doing well, and I hope you're ready for today's video. Now, this lesson, what exactly are we going to do here? Well, the last video, I pretty much left off on the select photo feature right over here on the right side. Remember, we implemented this feature and functionality inside of the add transaction form. If you scroll all the way down, we have the UI view representable right here, the view controller representable. Clicking on that, we present our image picker controller. Selecting our photo, we can dismiss that, and we'll see our photo right here. Now, today's video, what I want to show you guys how to do here is to actually persist our transaction inside of this form, persist it inside of core data, and then eventually show the transactions inside of the vertical list here. So let me show you how that works in this version of the app. I'm gonna click on plus transaction here, and let's say Mac Pro M1. All right, this guy, I think it's going for something like $2,000, so we'll just pick that. I'll leave the date and I'll select a photo. Now, to get photos inside of your simulator, you can just drag images directly in the simulator like so. So I'm just dragging it and then dropping it off, and I'll click on the actual photo. It actually kind of navigates you to the image picker here. So just click on the back and you'll be back to your app. Click on that, and below you'll get your photo in the bottom. So pretty good stuff. I'm going to hit the save right here, and it's going to actually save my transaction. And then now, in addition to the flowers, I also have the Mac Pro M1 with the price on the right, the actual timestamp of the purchase, and then we have this little button on the right side. Now, the finished version of the app, that button, it will actually present a delete transaction action sheet. So we'll get to that eventually in the later lessons. Today's video, I simply want to persist my transaction from this form here. And let me kind of show you how that's going to work by navigating to our main view. Remember, our preview, looks pretty much something like this. We have these multiple cards being swiped left and right. Once I hit the plus transaction, I want to say, test and save, and I want this transaction to be saved inside of this main view here. So how exactly am I going to do that? Well, why don't I first show you guys the core data entity that is going to represent a transaction. First, let's head back into our data model file here. Last couple of lessons, I think the last section, we created the card entity. To create another entity, you just simply want to hit add entity below. Nothing too bad, and click on the new entity here. So I'm simply going to hit enter and call this a transaction. This might be a reserved keyword inside of Swift, but I'm just going to use transaction and we should be fine. Next up, we have a couple of different attributes, right? We have the name here, the amount, the date, which I'll call a timestamp. We have this many-to-many row, which we'll take care of later. And then we have the photo. Let me run through this list really quickly. I'm going to say name, and let's click on the string below. Always hard to find, but it's definitely in that list. And next we have the amount. This, you can use a double or a float. Just to make things simple, I'll use a float. And then it's always good to have a timestamp on your entities. This way you can order them through the timestamp on the creation date. And then this is your date type, like so. Lastly, why don't we move on to the actual photo? For the attribute name, you can either call it photo or photo data. I'm going to say photo data to make it a little more explicit as to exactly what we're storing. This way, when someone looks at your code, they don't get too confused. Okay, so amount, photo data, name, and timestamp, those are my 4 attributes. And now what I'll do is I'm going to go back to my add transaction form here. And the moment that I hit this save button, so let's hit the resume, resume a few times, and I think eventually we'll get our form to show in the right side. So excellent stuff there. The moment that I hit the save button, right, I want to execute some function. Let's see, where is my save button? You can command click into that right here. Or you can simply say command and option and click into that. And I think you'll just go into the definition. Maybe it's command control click. So here is my save button. One thing that you want to do is to start saving your transaction inside of core data, right? Remember, the way to do that is to first create your entity. So your entity, what is this guy? Well, this will be your actual transaction to create. And this, you can use a transaction right here with the context of your core data context. What is our context? Well, I'm going to create it above using the persistent controller. So persistent controller.shared.container.view context, like so. Hopefully you guys are familiar with typing out this bit of code. It's always a little bit tedious to type out something that long, but I think this is the best we can do for now. Next thing we'll do is you can start setting the properties on your transaction here, and you have your state properties above using self.name, or just use regular name, should be fine. Your state properties are up here with a name, the amount, and your date. And then last lesson we also created this photo data. Why don't we make things cleaner by putting all of your state properties in the same section. This way things are nice and tidy. All right, moving on, we are going to navigate back down below. And so our transaction, we can create the actual name right here. And you see you have an error, right? And before I get to the error, why don't I also say the amount equals self.amount right here. So amount is a string. I'll fix that in just a moment. Why don't I create the timestamp instead? So timestamp equals self.date, like so. All right, now the next question is, what exactly are these errors and how exactly do I want to, go about fixing them? Well, this guy says that the transaction constructor, it doesn't really take any arguments and we're passing this context to it. If you're not familiar with how Swift works, you might not know exactly that there's already a transaction class. So if you command click into this, you can jump to the definition. It'll actually navigate you into the SwiftUI framework code. And inside of this code, you already have this keyword called transaction. And it deals with, things like animations and stuff like that. And whenever you have a scenario where, you're going to overload a keyword inside of Swift, you don't exactly want to, overload things as important as a transaction. So one way to solve this problem is just simply go back into your data model and give this a different name. And I think I'm just going to go with the card transaction as my entity name. This way, Swift doesn't get confused about my code. All right, hopefully you guys are aware of why I'm calling this card transaction. And basically, I'm just going to give it this name here. Next up, you'll see that card transaction is not able to be found inside of the scope, which means that our code base doesn't exactly contain this card transaction class. The way I'm going to fix this problem is to go back into my core data model file, and I'm going to just highlight this area here. It doesn't exactly matter where you're highlighting, but once you have this file open, you can go into the Xcode menu, and inside of the editor section, you have this create NS manage object subclass. Once you click on that, you'll get this menu here and have this checkbox checked and hit next. And then somewhere inside of your project, right, just hit the create. It doesn't matter so much. Once you have it created, you'll have these two files here. You'll notice that if you try to build your project having these two files, it says that it's going to fail the actual build, right? And the actual error for why this happens is somewhere right here. If you click into it, it'll tell you that multiple versions of these files are being created. So the way to actually fix this is just to hit the backspace on these files or just, right click delete. I went over this in one of the previous lessons when we were creating the card entity. And basically this will fix our problem. I'm going to move to trash. And then once I do that, those files will pretty much disappear. I'm going to go back to my transaction form here, and I can now hit the command B. And once I do that, this is going to spin and it says build succeeded. Next up, if I hit resume, this will also come up with the red or the green instead of the red, which means that my preview is now working properly. Sometimes I notice that in Xcode 12 and also in Xcode 13, even though you just apply that trick of deleting your core data files, sometimes you'll get this red error to show up constantly instead of your editor. It's kind of annoying. So when that happens, if you restart your Xcode editor, that red error should go away. And if it doesn't, you might have to clean your project, but nonetheless, your code should be able to compile. And the simulator and the preview should also work. Okay, so pretty long-winded there. But once you do that, you can say transaction, and you'll have access to all those properties that you've created inside of your entity object inside of the data model. Okay, so in other words, we can now set the amount. You can see the amount is a float, and also photo data is the data optional. All right, so why don't we go ahead and just create the amount here. And the amount, you can say self.amount, but there's going to be a type mismatch, right? Amount is a string, so you can just do that. And I believe you can use a float wrapper and maybe just nil coalesce to 0. I think that should be fine. And we can now go to transaction and photo data. And this guy should be a clean setter because these are both the same types. Now that we have our transaction, we can move on to finally saving this transaction, right? And I'm just going to type out this relatively quickly to save it like so, and then catch our potential error. And we'll say print out fail to save transaction, and then just print out the error right here at the very end. You might be asking where this error is coming from. And well, whenever you apply a do catch block, there is a implicit error that's being defined here. You can actually give it a different name. I believe you have to either say this, so custom error. I think this is fine. And just print that right here. And once you do that, your code should work. So if you want to give the error a custom name, you can apply this trick here. Okay, so with our save button now hooked up, one last thing I want to do is when the save actually completes, right? I'm just going to dismiss this entire modal. And now that I have the code working, I'm simply going to save my transaction here. And how do I want to do that? Well, I'm going to go back and let's navigate back to our main view, right? I actually want to present the modal. And this should be able to resume after a few tries there. And here is my modal. Add the transaction. And let's say flowers. And let's say flowers are going to be $20. And we have our date. We have our select photo. I'm going to select the photo of the flowers there. And now I'm just going to hit the save like so. So eventually this should dismiss my actual modal here. There might be a potential error, so I'm simply going to run this in the simulator here first. And so now that my simulator is up and running, I can go ahead and test the transaction. I'm going to hit the add, and we'll say test right here, and the amount of 1, 2, 3. Click on some photo, doesn't matter so much. I'm gonna click on that, and now I'll hit the save. So one thing I noticed is that sometimes the simulator in the preview right here, it doesn't want to work for the first time. And one trick to getting the underlying issues resolved is to simply hit the stop button right here, hit the resume a few times, and it's going to kind of recycle itself. And once it does that, I'm going to hit the play again and make sure I can actually save my transaction. So test right here, and 555, select a photo. Let's use a waterfall this time and hit the save right here. So again, once you hit the stop and play and resume, your preview simulator should be fine. All right, that looks good. And now that my transaction is actually saved, right? What I would like to do is to actually show my transaction inside of a vertical list here. In other words, I have a kind of a square box containing the transaction name and the date, the price, and also the photo. I'll show you exactly how to do that right below this block here. It's pretty easy. Some of you guys can kind of guess how to do this already. I'm gonna go back to my main view and scroll all the way up to the top here. So previously, we were able to fetch our cards using this bit of syntax with the fetch request, operates on the view context, and we have our array of cards that's automatically fetched by the SwiftUI framework. If you want to do this one more time using a different array of objects, you can simply use something else. So a different fetch request that I'll use right below this one is to define something called a transactions fetch results. And the way this is going to work is very similar to this one on line 17. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this code. For the actual key path, it doesn't matter so much, but I'm going to use my card transaction. And then right below that, right, the fetch request is going to actually fetch a result of card transactions instead. So make sure to paste the actual entity in here and also here. And for the name, we'll just declare it as a variable of transactions, and that error should go away. So again, SwiftUI, the framework, it's going to automatically fetch your transactions for you. And in other words, you can simply go down below here. So here is my actual add transaction button. I'm just going to go down below. And right here, I'm simply going to, again, iterate through my transactions above, very similar to this there. Let's see, this code is fairly easy to follow. I'm going to use a for each loop on transactions. For this guy, you can say, let's see, brace transaction in your actual array. And then let's use the text of transaction, transaction.name, and nil coalesce it to the empty string. All right, Command Option P, you should be able to see something showing up inside of this list here. So you see test is showing up like that. If you give this some padding value here, it's going to be spaced out just a little bit. And then finally, you can use maybe a VStack to enclose your entire transaction. And you can do this right here, Command Option left bracket. And then maybe give this a shadow of radius 5. Let's see what we get. Kind of looks like that. You might want to use a background of color.white. We use white for now, and you'll see this there. So pretty good stuff. Let's just round things off a little bit. If you want to extend this left and right, you can simply use an H stack right here and a spacer. And yeah, things are looking really, really good. Maybe I'll take the padding and use Command Option bracket right, and we'll get that. So this, I'll finally give this one last padding, and here we go. So now we have the actual transaction we saved before. If you click on add transaction yet again, we'll call this something like flowers in your garden, and that looks okay. We'll use 500 or 600 right here. We'll make sure to spell this correctly. So click on that, and we are going to retype that out. All right. I'm going to click on the photo and click on maybe the waterfall. Doesn't matter so much what exactly the photo is. And now you'll see how flowers in your garden is right above the test transaction below. If you want to render out everything like we have in the right side simulator here, it's really simple as well. Maybe I'll show you how to do that inside of this VStack. So the actual transaction, you can give this the font of headline for now, and that looks okay. I'll get a thicker font. You can put this in an H stack right here, and this guy will do that, and then we can get a spacer like so. And this, I can use the image name of system name ellipses, and then this should be spaced out in the middle. So, you know, the preview is a little bit slow from time to time, but after a while, this should look somewhat okay on the right side. And we'll just wait for the similar to kind of finish up here. And then now we have the label on the left side, and also we have the right side ellipses right here. This guy is actually a button, so why don't I just declare it as a button for now? And we'll hit enter, and this guy is the actual ellipses inside of my button label. Finally, once you do that, this guy is going to appear kind of bluish. And let me just show you what this is using the system size of, I don't know, 24 seems fine. The button is rather large now, which is okay. If you want to give everything a black tint, you can just say the foreground color of, I'm going to use color.label just to make sure dark mode is supported. And then once I do that, things are looking a lot better. For the actual image of your transaction, right, you can simply go down to this. You can actually remove this spacer now because you have this spacer here. In other words, if I remove that and just put in image, and let's see, the actual image is going to come from some kind of data. just to make things safe, I'll call this the photo data equals the transaction.photo data. And then I'll also set the let UI image going to come from the actual UI image of the data of photo data right before. And again, this is just to make sure things are safe and you're not force unwrapping anything. Use the UI image from the declaration here. You'll see your image showing up as a very, very large image like that. Not the best, so a quick fix for that is to use a resizable modifier. Looks like that right now. And then finally, let's see, fill is what I like to use. So scaled to fill. And finally, we kind of have this object inside of our view. And looks pretty good. If you want to format your date and your price to something like that, you can do that as well. Do I want to show you guys how to do that? I guess I might as well since we're here. Why don't we first talk about the price in the right side. So we have the ellipses label. Let's use a VStack. So VStack. I'll move this inside of my VStack like that. And then I will use the text of the price. So let's see price. And I just want to see this show up right there. And for the actual button, you can put some padding on it. Let's use a padding of 6. I think that's kind of okay. It looks kind of messed up. So let's use edge insets of the top. And we'll use 6 and 8 and 4 and 0. So the numbers are kind of random, but it gives us this effect there. And then finally for the actual price, right? We're using the transaction. So transaction.amount. Transaction.amount, this guy, it's actually a floating number or floating decimal. So you can try to use this right here, unwrap it like so using the nil coalesce of 0. Once you do that, right, and you'll see that your actual price right here, this is $2,000 with a trailing 2 decimals. So, 600.0, it's not exactly the best way to represent the US currency. And, if you have your own currency inside of your own country, you might want to format this, right? So the easiest way of formatting that is to use this string format here. So string format, I'm going to grab the transaction. So transaction.amount. Again, I'll nil coalesce it to 0. And let's see. So this is actually not the format, but I'll cut that. And that's the actual arguments. For the format, I'll use this right here. So it's percent. So percent.2. And for a floating point number, you have to use F. For a double, I think you'll have to use something else. Maybe F actually works, but for integer, you have to use a D. And once I have that, I'll cut this code and I'll put that in here instead. This should be okay. So this is closing that and that closes that. And now you can simply use a $sign here. And once you have that, you'll have your $600. Again, you might want to format this a little differently for your own locale. But for the US, that's what I'll use for now. My ellipses button seems to be kind of centering itself. So I'll use alignment. And this will just put it on the trailing edge on the right there. And I think things are fine for now, at least. For the actual timestamp of your purchase, right? So flowers in your garden, it's this right here. For this, I believe you can, let's see, Command Option A. So does that work? Command Shift A. So Command Option A. So right here. So Command Option A. So Command Option A. You can click on that, and you'll actually present this kind of pop up. If you want to just hit embed in VStack or HStack or ZStack or list or whatever, you can simply use this shortcut menu. It's actually very useful, and I like using it a lot when I don't feel like, typing out code. So we'll just embed that in VStack and we'll get that here. Next thing I'll do is right below the name, I want to present the actual date, right? So you can say transaction.timestamp.description. It might give you something really, really long. And you'll see your actual date is appearing in this format with the actual the time for your transaction, which you don't really care so much about. So what I'll do is I'm going to show you a nice trick here. So this is my other Xcode editor, and I'll just copy over something called a date formatter. All right, so I will copy this date formatter and I will paste that somewhere inside of here. And here is my date formatter. And then finally, I will go back up to my code again. This guy, let's kind of fix this first. I don't think you need to nil coalesce the amount, so let's get rid of that. And for the actual timestamp, you simply want to do this here. So date formatter, and you'll say string from a particular date object. And this guy simply takes your transaction.timestamp like so. And I think that should be fine. The timestamp is optional, so you might want to nil coalesce it or use this if let optional binding. So this guy will say date if let date equals transaction dot timestamp. So spell this out correctly, obviously. And then finally, we'll move this right here. So this, and that. And we'll just simply move that right here. This will now be the data object like so. I'm going to hit Command Option P. It's going to re-render out everything inside of my simulator here. And now you'll see your formatter is pretty much, formatting it to some more legible string like that. Finally, I will apply an alignment on my VStack of leading. It's going to push everything to the left side there. All right, so quite a bit of code to persist our transaction inside of core data. But as you can see, if you persist things correctly by modifying your data model, and also if you set up your fetch request here with the proper transactions and fetch results, rendering out your core data entities is very simple. All you gotta do is to apply a for each loop and then give it a visual representation using this chunk of code here. All right, if you guys have any questions, do let me know and I'll try my best to answer them. And that's gonna be it. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Bye-bye. Hey, hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome back for another exciting lesson in the SwiftUI Core Data course today. Hope you're doing all right, and I hope you're ready for today's video. Now, in the very last lesson, I showed you guys how to save transactions inside of our application right over here on the right side. Let me remind you what that looks like by clicking on the ad right here, and let's say test, test, test. I use the amount of $12, and let's select a photo below. I'm gonna click on this bad boy here, and I will hit the save. You'll see that my transaction is now available inside of this list in the bottom here. If I scroll down, you'll see about 4 transactions being saved. This one is $12 and everything looks pretty good to me. Hopefully you guys were able to follow along with everything so far. Again, if you guys have any questions, please ask me below. Now, today's video, there are a couple of features that I want to kind of show you guys how to build here. You see in this version of the application, right, I have the brand new blue card right here at the very top. And you see I have a transaction of iMac M1 24 inches. And you can see if I swipe to a different card inside of my list at the very top, you'll see all of the transactions sort of changed based on which credit card I'm using. So swiping back, you'll see the iMac M1 yet again. So this is a pretty good feature to build out. There's another feature that I want to show you guys how to build, which is this right here. Let's say I want to click on the little ellipses on the top right, show this action sheet here and hit the delete, and that should remove my actual transaction. So those are 2 different features that I want to work on. Why don't we first talk about this delete button here, and then we'll talk about actually changing our transaction based on this tab view component. Okay, so hopefully that sounds good. I'm gonna go ahead and get back into our project. So let's see, I'm gonna head back into my main view file here. And the last video, I pretty much left off on this chunk of code. Let me close out of that guy. And you'll see for the transactions list right here that we're fetching above, we're rendering it out using this huge VStack right here. And I don't really like my code being kind of cluttered inside of my main view. So whenever I encounter this type of situation, right, I actually prefer to create a sub component. And what I mean is I want to take this entire transactions list and I'm just going to put it inside of a different file. And maybe I'll take this button up here as well, which is this guy above. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the button and I'll take the entire transactions list and I'll just simply cut it. And what's left over is just this top section here. And maybe I want to take this text as well, but I think that's fine. For all of the entire components that I just cut out, I'm going to call this the transactions list view. And I'll just create this right here. So let's say new file, and I'll create a SwiftUI view. And I'll call this the transactions list view, like so. Create this sucker inside of the transactions group. And now what I'll do is I'm going to kind of encapsulate everything inside of a VStack just to be safe. And then I will paste my code inside of here. All right, so once you paste your code, you'll see you're missing a couple of different things, which is this state variable and also this transactions right here. So let's first go ahead and take this from the main view. And we will take this. So we'll take this boolean here, paste that inside of this file. So paste that right here, add a couple of nice spaces to make sure things are okay. This error should go away, and now we'll get the transactions error below. Remember that transactions was defined right here. And whenever you kind of use these fetch requests, you actually need the actual manage object context as well. Otherwise, this fetch request doesn't really work. So what I'll do is I will cut that code, put that right here, move back to my main view, take this right here. I'm just going to copy and bring this guy right above the fetch request. So once that is done, I think I should be okay. I'm missing this date formatter as well, so I'm just going to go back here. There is a date formatter that I kind of showed you guys how to build last lesson. And finally, I'm just going to paste that below right there. And it looks like everything should be able to compile. I'm going to hit the resume here, and you should see something inside of my right side panel. I noticed that whenever I am starting a new SwiftUI file, the right side preview takes a little bit of time to render, and sometimes it fails to render entirely. So this looks pretty good. I'm going to try to hit the play here now. And you see the entire list right here appears to be blank, and some of you guys might be able to guess why that is, right? And the reason is because the preview right here, it expects you to inject the manage view object context thing. So in other words, you want to use the key path of manage object context, and you want to pump in the actual context. So again, you can get it from the persistence controller, shared container, and the view context like that. And finally, you can just pass in the actual context. All right, so everything looks pretty good. You see your entire list view is now appearing inside of this kind of VStack. Again, the VStack is the kind of the root parent component of everything here. And in order to kind of make things work correctly, you probably want to wrap this thing inside of a scroll view. And I'll just put that here, and everything should work kind of correctly like so. All right, not so bad. And this is just a refactoring lesson that I kind of want to go over because every time your main view grows very ugly and cluttered, you just want to, perform some refactoring. And this is a pretty common practice. Last thing I'll do is maybe I'll take this bit of text and put it inside of the transaction list view as well. So in other words, I'll just put it here. And finally, I'll hit the resume button, and you should see the transaction list view like so. Okay, so when you hit the transaction, you'll see this form as well. And the last thing I'll do for today's lesson is, I guess I want to talk about this delete action button here, right? So how exactly do I kind of show this delete button? Well, it's pretty simple once you add a couple of variables to your project here. But before I do that, I want to also perform a second refactoring. The refactoring is going to occur inside of this list here. And the refactoring will actually kind of take place inside of this VStack. And what I want to do is for each one of these transaction blocks, I want to refactor it into a separate view itself. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. So in other words, I'm going to take this and I'm going to call this the card transaction view. And I'll pass in the transaction like this here. Now, whenever you create your view, you will have to say struct and card transaction view. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. And make sure to conform to the view protocol there. Finally, you want to create your body view, and I'll paste in all of that code that I had before. Everything should be okay. The date formatter, you'll see it's missing again. So I'm just going to move that inside of this class instead. Let's just paste it here. I think that should be fine. And then finally, you should be missing the transaction inside of this class. So last thing to do is just say let transaction be this card transaction here. So card transaction, and finally, things should be able to render out correctly yet again inside of the preview. We can wait for this guy to spin or just hit the space to kind of recycle the preview there. And now your transactions are kind of being rendered out inside of this list. And you see now my transactions list view, it's really clean. We have the button up here. And for each one of for each of the transactions, we're just using a simple sub view component. The reason why I'm doing this is because whenever I click on this ellipses here, I want to present an action sheet. And let's see, the action sheet is going to be, let's just attach it to this button here. So you can say action sheet with the is presented content, and the boolean is this right here. So let's say state var should present action sheets. And let's just default that bad boy to false. Right below, I'll just use the $sign base here. And for the actual content, hit enter. You need to return some kind of action sheet. Just hit .init and you should be fine. For the transaction text, you can say text and use the actual transaction .name here. And that's going to be nil coalesced. I don't really care about the text message. And for this guy, I'm just going to hit enter. And this, you need an array, right? And for this array, we'll just use the cancel button for now. Okay, moving on, I'm going to hit Command Option P to hit the resume. Finally, I will kind of see my list being rendered out on the right side with the action sheet showing, or should be showing, right? I'm going to say it should present, and I'll toggle this boolean here and click on this one more time. You'll now see the cancel button along with the actual transaction name of test below there. Clicking on that, you'll see test 1, 2, 3, and finally, this is actually going to say flowers in your garden. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Next thing I want to do is I want to actually talk about this delete button here, and that's pretty easy to build out. I'm going to go above here, and let's say destructive with an actual action, and let's see text delete here, and this guy, let's use enter, and here is my code that I need to kind of type out. Let's see, I don't exactly want to type out that code. So instead of using the code inside of here, you can actually just say handle delete and just hit a comma here. And right above or below, somewhere inside of your view, I'm going to say private and function and delete, and we should be good to go. So down here, this delete is going to be handled above here. And this is, again, just to make your code a little less cluttered. And let's see, everything should be working fine. So the delete is now showing. And finally, the last thing I need to do is actually delete these transactions inside of my list here. And the way that's going to work is very similar to what we've been doing before. You want to perform a do catch on the context delete. So you can say let context equals, let's see, persistent controller dot shared container view context. And then you want to say context dot delete your actual object. And this is just going to be the transaction that we pass in. Paste that bad boy in there, and then context dot save like that. This is going to potentially throw an error. And then finally, you can either, let's see, I'm just going to print out a message of fail to delete transaction. And this guy, let's just use the implicit error at the very end here. And everything should be fine. All right, so now that my delete function is written out, you can see if I delete, let's say this last transaction here, delete that, this should disappear, and now you'll see 3 transactions. Let's make sure we're deleting the right ones inside of this list. Delete the test, and now you'll have test 1, 2, 3, and flowers in your garden. All right, so things are looking pretty nice. If you go back to your main view, you can see that every time you delete a function or delete a transaction inside of your main view, everything should be working just perfectly. So in other words, if I delete the flowers in your garden and delete that, you'll see your transaction pretty much just disappears. One thing that you can try to kind of do to make your transaction a little bit smoother, or the deletion, is to possibly add a with animation. And sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. So I'll give it a try right here. In other words, you can say with animation, and let's just use that right here. And I believe this works a lot better inside of an actual list component. Sometimes this delete doesn't exactly perform correctly. So I'm going to go back into my main view here. And then let's add another transaction. So ABC, 1, 2, 3. Let's pick a photo. Let's use this one there, hit the save. All right, so that is my transaction. And let's delete this guy right here. So delete. And you see there's a sliding animation that you kind of briefly saw for a moment for test 1, 2, 3. Kind of slid up briefly. But, you know, if you want to add animation, you can try using this bit of code there. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but hopefully you kind of get the picture there. All right, that's going to wrap it up for today's lesson. Hopefully you guys now understand how to perform some code refactoring inside of your view objects. And the main reason why I kind of perform this card transaction view refactoring is because whenever I want to delete a transaction, you pretty much want to know exactly which transaction you're deleting. If you have all this view body code right here, if you have all that code inside of your for each loop, it gets a little bit confusing which transaction you should be managing every time you present this action sheet here. And again, that gets a little tricky. Hopefully you guys are going to be able to kind of follow this code here instead of, you know, putting all that code here. All right, so that's going to be it. Next lesson, I'll show you guys how to manage the actual transaction list view down below. In other words, every time I swipe to a new card, right, I want to show all of the transactions belonging to these cards here. And that's actually called a one-to-many relationship between different core data entities. All right, I'll see you guys then. Bye-bye. All right, hey, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back for another video in the SwiftUI Core Data course today. Hope you're doing well, and I hope you're excited about today's lesson. Now, in the very last video, I showed you guys how to delete transactions inside of our application. And let me quickly show you guys what that looks like right over here in the preview panel. So if I click on the top right ellipses, you'll see the delete button here. If I actually delete, you'll see this transaction disappear. And let me just show you that by clicking into the delete button right there. All right, so that's pretty good. And for today's video, I want to move on to a different topic related to our transactions here. And basically, I want to talk about a one-to-many relationship between different entities inside of core data. And what exactly am I talking about? Well, for the credit cards inside of our system, right, we have multiple credit cards, and you'll see that for each credit card, we can actually associate many different transactions to each single card. For example, we have Brand New Blue has 2 different transactions here. If I swipe over to the red card, you'll see I have the waterfall transaction. So by the end of today's video, hopefully I'll be able to show you guys exactly how this is done. Let's go ahead and get started by going back into our project and figure out exactly how this is done. The first thing I want to actually kind of navigate to is the data model for our project, right? So inside of our data model, we currently have two entities, the card and the card transaction. I guess you can delete this guy if you want to just get rid of it. But for the card and transaction, there's a section here called a relationship. And what you'll want to do is to add a relationship for the card transaction, right? You can imagine that for each transaction, it's going to belong to a credit card. That's pretty much how I kind of think about how this works. So just type in card, and for the actual destination, click on here. You'll be presented with the actual destination. Obviously, it's going to be the actual card object here on the top left. And then for the inverse, you'll see it says no inverse for now. Moving on, I'll navigate to the card entity. Down inside of the relationship, we'll repeat a very similar exercise of just typing in the transactions. So make sure to call it plural just to make sure your code makes sense. So I'm going to call it transactions, and for the destination, we'll use the card transaction. Now for the inverse here, you can actually hit the card, and the moment that you do that, you'll see that for the actual card transaction, you'll have this option here of transactions like that. So that's kind of how things work. And the most important part about setting up this relationship is to actually toggle this right here. So open up this editor menu on the top right, and then click on card and click on transactions. So currently, this type of relationship is known as the one-to-one relationship. And to change it, you can just toggle this to the many. Now, at the moment that you do that, you see that this right here changes to the M little entity tag. And for example, if you change it to 1, it's this O tag. And you want to make sure that it's this M1 right here, which means that one single card can have many transactions inside of your application. Now, the next thing you want to do is to go inside of this right here, and you want to click on the card for your card transaction. And you see that this guy just defaults to a one-to-one relationship, which is pretty much exactly what we need. Now, the next thing I'm going to kind of get into here is I'm going to go back to the add transaction form code here. And I'm going to toggle out of the right side panel. And now that you've set up your relationship inside of your data model, the last thing you need to do to save a card for each transaction is to go inside of your save button, right? So for example, if you hit the resume, you're inside of your code. This is the actual add transaction form here. And there is the save button, which is all the way down here, executing this code on the top right save. And whenever you save a new transaction, let's say this Mac Mini here, whenever you want to save this transaction, right, the last thing you need to do is to actually say transaction.card, and you see inside of the autocomplete, it presents you with the actual card property type. And you want to set it to some card, and what exactly is this guy? Well, we have to kind of figure out what card we want to save for this particular transaction. And we don't exactly have this card yet. So I'm going to show you exactly what this card needs to be. And before I do that, I'm going to go back to our main view right here. And so let's say we go through the exercise of adding a new transaction, right? I actually want to associate it to this green card here if I'm using this view. So hit resume a few times. And if I'm using this blue card, I want to associate it to this card. So in other words, I want to hit the save button right here and associate it to whatever card that is being shown inside of my main view tab view component here. So how exactly do we figure out which card we're currently highlighting? Is it the green? Is it the blue? What exactly is it? Well, for this kind of problem, it's actually very easy to solve. You see, for my navigation view inside of my main view, again, we have our tab view here, which is essentially this page tab component at the top. For the tab view, there is a constructor that you can use called a tab view. It's very similar to what we have before, but in addition to the content, we can actually add the selection as well. So for this guy, we have to figure out what kind of binding we want to pass into it. And let me just type out the code and explain to you what's going to happen here. So state private var, and we'll say card selection index, and we'll set this to a default value of 0. And for this guy, I'm going to use the selection as this card selection index. And for the content, I'll just enter here. It'll give you this bit of code to complete. Now, what exactly do I want to do here? Well, I'm going to use another for each loop. And instead of using this right here, instead of using for each on the cards, which is all the cards I have at the very top, I'm going to use a for each loop on 0 ... less than cards.count instead. And for this, I'll use the index, or just use I guess that'll be a little better. You can use index as well, but I just use I for now. And the last thing I'll do is I'm going to take this bit of code and copy it in here. And for each card, you see that I don't have this card variable like I had before here. So to make this easy, I'm just going to say card equals cards.I, or cards using the I as the index accessor on your array. Now, once you have that, the error will go away, and I will comment out of that code, and then I'll kind of cut this and paste that inside of this bit of code. So where was that? So that's on the tab view. So I will again copy this and paste that here instead. And I'll rerun my application. You'll see that the code pretty much does the exact same thing. And the advantage is, well, let me kind of get the preview up and running. So again, the code here looks exactly the same, or the application does. And the code is a tad different. So using this bit of code, I can actually figure out what exactly the card is inside of my application. And the way I'm going to do that is for the credit card view, right? You can actually attach a tag on it. So I'm going to attach a tag, and I'm going to use the tag of the actual I. And this I, it's just going to be the index of which I'm kind of scrolling across this tab view. So for example, I is 0 in this case. And then for this, I is 1. If I have another card, then I would be 2 if I scroll one more over. All right, so with all of this setup right here, the only reason why I want to do this is to figure out which index the actual tab view is. And with this bit of code, let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to say if let selected card equals, let's see, cards, and let's say card index right here. And if that's true, then I will set this as the selected card.name, and we'll nil coalesce the name. All right, so let's kind of see what we have here. Let me just comment out of this guy for now to make things easier to see. So you see this text component down here that says working correctly. It's actually the name of the credit card here, which is the very first slot. So this means that I have a handle on the actual selected card. If I swipe over to the right, you'll see that the last card added here, it's now being shown at the very bottom inside of this text component on 42. If I swipe back, we'll have working correctly, which is again this green card here. And then if you add a new card, you'll see that this works. Let's see, brand new card, and let's pick a red card for now. All right, so that looks good. And if I kind of save over, this card appears here. So for whatever reason, the blue card has disappeared. I believe if I hit a space right here, the card should show up again. So brand new card is here, and working correctly is here. And then the blue card is finally on the right side. So last card here, working correctly, and brand new card is showing below. Okay, so this is pretty good. And the next thing I will do in today's lesson is to actually kind of transport this card all the way into the add transaction form. And the way I'm going to do that is to, again, let's see, I'm going to use this transaction list view. I'm going to cut this and paste that in here. And I'm going to first pass this selected card as a dependency of this transactions list view. The way I'm going to do that is to, let's navigate to the transactions list view. Again, it's the long list of transactions inside of your application. And let's see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just say let card as the card right here. And once I do that, I can go back to my main view, and the transaction list view will now have a card dependency, and I'll pass in the selected card like that. And then finally, for the transaction list view, right, I have the actual add transaction form. Let's say whenever I hit this button right here, so the add transaction, we're presenting the add transaction form. And then I'll do the same exercise of passing in the card of self.card. I'll just add the self here to make it easier to read. It's actually this card here. And this transaction form is right here. And all that's left is you want to also add a dependency of the card and the card like that. All right, so that's kind of how we pass the card all the way into our transaction form there. And then finally, what we need to do is we need to go into the save button on the top right. And then at the very beginning of this lesson, right, I have the transaction.card, which is this object here. And the only thing that I need to do is to finally say the card for this transaction is the card that I'm passing into this form. So with all of that written out, I believe my application should be able to compile and run. We'll see what this guy is complaining about. Let's go into the error right here, and it says missing card in call. Okay, so this is a little interesting. The first thing to do is click into that. And for the file of your transaction list view, right, in the last lesson, we created a preview that looks like this right here. So transaction list view now requires you to pass in a card. So if you click into that, it says card like so. And the thing that you can do to pull out a card inside of your preview is to actually create the card as this right here. So I'm going to say static let first card equals some kind of card object right here. And we'll just equal to some kind of block of code that will eventually return my card. So what exactly does this look like here? Well, let me just copy some code. This will make it a little bit faster to go through. And let me use optional instead, and I'll paste in this code right here. So obviously get the context, get your fetch request off your card object here. So for every entity in core data, there's something called a fetch request like that. And if you want to get the cards, all you got to do is to execute context, which is your persistence controller, shared container view context. Just execute your fetch request. And then once you get your actual objects back, just call first on it, and you'll get the first one in your list of entities. So just a simple bit of code right here. We're just sorting by the timestamp in which our card is being created. And finally, we are ready to just simply render out this card here. So you see this first card is optional. The reason why it's optional is because, you might not have a card when you first create your application. So that's kind of why. If let card equals first card equals that, then I will pass it in here, and I will just use that right here. Okay, so it looks pretty good. I believe I have another error in my application, so I'm going to click into that. And for the add transaction form, which is this guy, we have a very similar problem. I'll paste that in here. And let's just say if let card equals first card, then I will cut that in here. And we'll paste that in here and kind of just fix that. So let me do that. And I believe the card is here, and this will be the card. All right, so quite a bit of code to fix while you're kind of refactoring your code here. But once everything is kind of nice and tidied up, you'll see that for this particular working correctly, this transaction here, or this card rather, you'll see it kind of showing up as I swipe left to right. So brand new card, working correctly is right here. And let's say I want to add a transaction that belongs to this brand new card, right? Well, simply now I can just click on here and say, let's see, transaction for red card. And we'll say 1, 2, 3. Select a photo if you want to do so. Click on maybe the flowers right here and hit the save. Okay, so now that we have our first transaction, I can swipe over here and you'll see that while you swipe over, we don't exactly show different transactions, right? So what I expect to happen, have happen is that for the brand new card here, I expect to see the roses below. And the moment that I swipe over to this green card here, I expect the roses to disappear and I expect nothing in the screen. Likewise for the blue card, I expect nothing to show up here because I haven't added transactions to this particular card yet. So the question is, like, how do I have this behavior where whenever I swipe over, I can kind of change these transactions inside of my application very smoothly? Well, the way to do this is to notice what's happening in transactions list view, which is currently this guy. So at the very top, right, the way that the actual transactions are being fetched is through this bit of SwiftUI code. And looking at it, the fetch request is going to, sort on the timestamp property. And then next, it's going to fetch all of these card transaction objects here. It's going to put it inside of this transactions using this view context up here. So instead of, fetching every transaction inside of your application, you can actually filter it down based on whatever card you're using. So how does this work? Well, let me just go ahead and copy over some more code. And instead of this transactions list view, right? Let's kind of do some custom code here. I'm going to declare an initializer and pass in the card here. And then we'll just set up the card that's above, make sure to set this guy equal to something. And then the next thing we can do is we can actually declare a fetch request inside of this bit of code here. The easiest way of doing this is to first remove this guy. So I'm going to comment out that guy and I'm going to declare, let's see, var fetch request, and we'll say fetch request right here. And we will declare the generic type of card transaction. All right, so once you have this, right, we're no longer using the auto fetch feature here, and instead we're declaring our fetch request equal to be the, let's see, fetch request right here. Again, we'll declare our entity type like so. And then for this guy, you can have the entity and sort descriptors and predicate, and also the animation. So the important part about this exercise is you can, let's see, for the entity, you just simply want to use the card transaction dot entity like so. So entity like that. For the sort descriptors, you can use something very simple like dot init. And we'll just use the key, let's see, key ascending. So this guy, let's just use timestamp. I'm just going to sort the transactions based on the timestamp. And for the ascending, you can use false. And then that looks good. I think that's it for the sort descriptors. And the predicate is actually the important one. You can go ahead and use the dot init with the format and arguments. So for this guy, all you want to do is you want to actually fetch all your transactions based on this card object here. And that's very easy. You just want to say card equals this percent at right here. So this is the percent and at, and that's going to take in this argument on the right side. So for example, this card, it's going to be, let's see, the card is going to be, you can say card or self.card, it's up to you. I don't need the animation, so I will just leave it as that. All right, so this code looks a little strange. So let's see what's right here. So that's the card, and I think this is going to be fine. So maybe we don't need the arguments. So let me get rid of that, and I think that's going to be okay. All right, so let's see what we have so far. you'll see for the actual fetch request, right? Again, we're no longer using the default fetch request right here. We're constructing our own fetch request because we want to pass in a predicate checking for the card that we're actually using. So that looks okay for this guy. Finally, at the very bottom here, you'll see that the previous transactions, which you have in your long list here, right? We no longer have access to these transactions. So instead of using transactions, you'll use fetch request and wrapped value. You'll see the results are actual card transactions. And once you have that, I think that's going to be it for all of your code changes. And now we are kind of good to go. So you see inside of the preview simulator on the right side, we are already showing our red flowers here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our main view, right? You see our flowers are here. If I drag over to the right, you'll see this list is empty. So I'll add a new transaction. And we'll say waterfall. Let's see, amount 1, 2, 3. Select a photo. Let's click on this waterfall here. And we'll just hit the save. So at the moment that I hit the save, you'll see the waterfall shows up here. If I drag over to the left side, the roses are now showing here. If I drag over, waterfall. And finally, if I drag over to the last card, it's not going to have any transactions because I haven't really added any to this card just yet. I can go ahead and again add a different transaction. So let's call this the beach. And I think there's a beach photo here. So save, and here we go. We have the beach, we have the waterfall, and we have the roses at the very bottom. So things are looking pretty good inside of my application. And there's one small bug that I want you guys to think about. And if I drag over to the left, you'll see it kind of lags every time I drag over. So once it pages and it goes to a new list of transactions, you'll see that there's a slight lag between each card, right? So try to think about why that's happening, and I'll kind of tell you guys how to fix that in the next lesson. Okay, again, if you guys have any questions, make sure to leave them down below. I know this lesson had a lot of new code. If you go back up to transactions list view, the self.fetch request right here, using this bit of code, we're able to kind of manually construct our fetch requests on our own. And the advantage of doing this is that we can actually declare our own predicate and make sure that we include a filter if we want to do so. So this is our filter here. And make sure you are able to follow along with this code there, and you should be fine. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Bye-bye. All right. Hey, hello. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back for another lesson in the SwiftUI Core Data course today. I really hope you're doing all right, and I hope you're ready for today's video. Now, in today's lesson, what exactly do I want to show you guys how to do here? Well, I want to show you guys a couple of different bug fixes with our application right over here. And basically, in the last video, I mentioned a bug related to swiping left and right on the cards right here. And as you can see, every time I swipe over to a new card, right, it kind of lags and it takes a split second to load the transactions down here. And you'll see that occur every time I swipe over. So you might be wondering what exactly is causing this bug, right? I want the behavior to be something like this right here. So if you swipe over left and right, you'll see the loading of our views below. It's really smooth and it's really fast. If I swipe over to the left again, you see there's virtually no lag whatsoever. So how exactly do I go about finding the solution to these problems, right? Well, the first thing that I always try to do is to first start kind of deleting things from my application. And the first thing that I'll try to do here is I would like to hide this bottom section of my application. And if I go back to our main view, you'll see you have your tab view up here. And then below you have your transactions list view. So I'm just simply going to comment out of this line right here and wait for the good old preview to re-render. Now next, I will try to swipe over to the left, and right, and right. And you'll notice that the lag has pretty much disappeared completely. And Through this tiny little exercise, I'm able to determine that the bug is related to this transactions list view. And then furthermore, if I look into this list view, right, I can kind of guess what's happening. And basically these images right here, I suspect that they are being loaded from core data, which in fact they are. And I also feel like maybe these images are really large. So these images from the actual simulator right here, whenever you select a photo, the default images that you pick inside of this picture here, they're actually quite massive. I think there's something like 6,000 pixels by 8,000 pixels. So that's a couple of megabytes worth of data. Now, whenever you try to pull all that data from core data, every time you swipe over to the left, you're pulling down new transactions from the database, right? Doing that is extremely slow. And so one potential solution that I'll show you here to fix this problem is to go back into the add transaction form here. And then whenever you're picking your images, you're inside of this photo picker view, which is this guy here. So let me hit the play. Get this bad boy to start running, select photo. This photo picker view is actually this view right here. And then inside of the coordinator, we have this image picker delegate method, which tells us the info original image. This gives us whichever image that we try to select. And then right below that, the image data is coming from JPEG data with compression quality of 1. So a couple of things that you can try here is to reduce this down to something like 0.5. That kind of works, but a better solution is to actually reduce the overall width and height dimension of your image. In other words, I'm going to go ahead and copy over some code. And let's see, where do I want to paste this bad boy? I'm going to go down to somewhere right here, right above the preview. I'm going to copy this extension on UI image. And the extension method is called resize. It takes in a new size parameter of CG size, and it returns you some kind of UI image. You don't really have to care so much about what the code is doing here, but just know that it's resizing your image based on a scale, and it's trying to maintain the aspect ratio as well. If you search online, Stack Overflow will provide you with a lot of different methods, and they all work fine. I'll just use this one, and I'll provide this below as well. I'm going to go back up, and let's head over to use our extension inside of our image picker here. So again, we're capturing our original image, and the image is here. You can simply say image.resize. We'll use our extension method. And for the actual size, right, it's really up to you what you want to use as a size. I'm going to use init width of let's just say 500 and the height of 500 as well. So that's pretty good. The next thing I will do is I want to cut this code here. So let's just say let resized image equals all that. And then right below resized image, instead of using this guy, which is the original image, I'm going to use the resized image instead. So paste that in here. And I think I should be good. You never know when you're trying to run these previews on the right side. It always is a little bit flaky. And then now we have our preview up by the green dot, so I know everything is good. And the next thing I'll do is I'm just going to head back into my main view here. And again, if I swipe left and right, you see that the images or the transactions that have persisted before, they have these really heavy images. And the first thing I will do is I'm going to get rid of these images down below by just simply deleting the transaction. So delete that, you'll see my transaction is gone. If I swipe left and right, you see swiping left and loading this roses, it's gonna take a while, but swiping over to the right, because we no longer have our image, this view is not going to lag. And so that's pretty good. If I swipe over to the right, you see it lags briefly yet again. All right, now the next thing that we are going to do is I'm just going to delete all the images that I've already created. So the transaction right here, let's delete that as well. And I'm going to create new transactions with the new code. Simply hit the add a transaction. So let's say roses and select our roses photo again, which is right here. And we'll give this 1, 2, 3, hit the save. And here we have our roses. Yet again, it's very simple. And you see the dimension of this image is now square because I've used 500 by 500. You can use whatever you want and your code should be fine. I'm going to swipe over to the right and swipe over to the left. You'll see there really isn't any lag when you pull down this image from core data. And let's go back to add transaction form. You see saving a 500 by 500 image. This is much easier on the database to pull out. So yeah, I do recommend using a trick like this to make sure everything works. You might want to try to lower the compression quality to maybe 0.1 as well if your images are too large. Okay, so things are looking pretty good. And now let's kind of go back to main view yet again. If I swipe over here, and let's say I want to create another transaction, and we will go down here, 555, select our photo, let's pick something nice like the waterfalls and save. Okay, again, I'm going to confirm by swiping left and right. You see things are loading really quickly, and there is no more lag. Okay, so hopefully you guys have no questions whatsoever on that bug fix there. The next bug fix I want to go over has to do with the top portion of our tab view component here instead of main view. And there's a couple of weird issues that I introduced in the last lesson by using this cars.count. And let me show you a couple of bugs here. The first bug is whenever you create a card, it doesn't exactly show. So you see I have three cards, right? The red, green, and blue. So let me try to create a black card. So here is my black card. I'm going to head down below, click on black card with the black color and hit save here. You'll see the black card does appear, but you know, the first card in the orange, let's see, that's orange and that's green. I'm now missing the blue card at the very end of my swipey view here. And so that's kind of a problem. If I hit space and re-render the preview, you'll see I have black, orange, green, and blue. Now the other issue that you'll encounter here is if you try to delete a card, your application will crash. So delete, and you see preview has crashed. The reason why that's happening is because you're using this cars.count instead of a tab view, using this for each. And because it's lost count of how many cards exist on this kind of set here, the index gets caught within this tab view, and it just crashes. So that's kind of a problem. And you might be asking, well, how do I fix this issue, right? Well, in the last lesson, the reason why I introduced this example of using 0 to the cars count, this array of numbers here, the reason why I introduced this is to kind of illustrate how to maintain the selection based on the index value of each card I'm swiping through. So for example, this is index 0, this is 1, and this is 2. But using this right here is not exactly safe. And the thing that I want to actually do here is to provide a much better solution. And the solution is going to go back to using this previous style that I kind of commented out in the last video. And to make this a little easier to follow here, I'm just going to first declare a different selection. So I'm going to call this my selected card hash like that, and just set this equal to maybe -1. That should be fine. And then next step, I'll copy this guy, and I'm going to create a new tab view here just to kind of type things out. For the selection, I'll use the selected card hash, and the content is very similar to what I have down here, but I'm going to use this instead. So I'll just copy that, and let's just cut that code and erase that and put that in here to make things faster. So essentially, I'm just iterating through all my cards here, and everything should be okay. So let's try to resume that. And if you resume that, everything should be fine. You'll have kind of this view here. And I'm going to comment out of that. This looks okay. I will cut that and paste that here. Okay, so with this new bit of code, using this selected card hash value up here, I can actually do something rather clever. And you see, I've kind of broken the functionality of swapping the transactions below. And let's see, selected card hash. What I'm going to do is for the tag of each of these views inside of my tab view, I can simply do this right here. Instead of giving it the index tag, which we did before, I'm going to give it some kind of hash value instead. And what is this going to come from? Well, I'm going to tag it with the card.hash, which is an integer hash right here. Basically returns an integer that pretty much represents the card inside of the database. And this guy returns you an integer, which is pretty much what I need. Now, the last thing that I'm going to kind of show you how to do here is, why don't I comment out of that? And I'm going to use this hash value to kind of figure out which card is being selected. So in other words, I can kind of apply the same trick here of just doing this. So if let first index equals cards dot first index where, I'm going to find the first index that matches this selected card hash. And you can just apply this and we'll say hash right here equals that right here. And this is basically going to establish what exactly the card is that I'm trying to get. I believe that needs to be equals equals and everything should be fine. Once I have this first index right, I can just pretty much say let card equals self.cards of the first index like that. I think that should be fine. And then finally, why don't I just kind of wrap this up here with saying card.name is that right here. So once I have this right, you'll see every time I swipe over to the right, I can start seeing what card I'm using. And last card to here, if I swipe to the left, I will see brand new card, which matches this title here, matches that title here, and matches this title here, last card to add, and then last card to add. So that's pretty good. If I hit a space bar, and you'll see one slight issue with this approach, which is when you're using this, this hash as your tag, so selected card hash, when you're first starting up your application, you haven't really swiped to the right or to the left. So this value right here is still -1, and which means that it's not able to figure out what the first card is there. So it doesn't really know until you swipe over to the right. And the way to fix this issue of the first kind of card missing, so if I reload, you'll see the first card is missing down below. Like I can't figure out exactly what the first card is. So one way to fix this is to simply use the onAppear right here and perform. And this code, which we will just say self.selected card hash equals cards.first.hash like that. And I believe you can just use -1 as the nil coalesce. And so the moment that you do this, right, every time this view, this tab view appears, it's going to just set up this this selected card hash as the very first card in your array or your set up here. And once you do that, everything works perfectly fine. Your selected card hash, it's able to figure out what the first index value is. So that's kind of a trick that I wanted to show you guys today. Last thing I want to do is I'm going to replace the, comment that out, and I'll replace this with the card value here. And everything should be fine. I'm going to swipe over left, swipe over right here, right, left. And you'll see the behavior of, changing out the transactions below. It's back inside of my application. And the last thing to confirm is that if I delete a card, my application should not crash. So delete, you'll see indeed it does not crash. And then finally, there's one other issue that you might want to fix here. And this video might be getting a little long, but I think I want to show you this final fix here. So let's say you add a new card, right? If I add a new card, should the card appear as the selected card here? Is that the behavior that we want? In other words, let's say I want to say test right here, and let's select a black card again like that, and hit save right here. So whenever that card is saved, I would expect this new card to show up as the very first card here. In other words, I'll show you what the behavior looks like. So I'll call this test again, and I'll use the black color, and I'll hit the save like that. You'll see the new card that was just created appears first. So how do we go about getting that behavior to work? Well, this might be a little bit trickier, but I'll go back into, let's see, add a card is right here, and add a card form. So add card form, it handles, adding our card, which is this form here. And it starts off with this initializer guy right here. And I don't want to exactly just have the card as my initializing dependencies. I want to have a kind of a callback handler, or callback closure is what they're called. And let's just say did add card or did edit card. Maybe did add edit. I think did add card sounds fine. And the next thing I'll do is I'm going to declare it as a callback closure. And let me just do this right here. Let me just type out the code, and right there is the empty return value. And just to make things okay, I'm going to declare it as an optional kind of a closure like so. And then inside of here, during my initializer, I'll kind of set it up. And I think I can do it like this right here. I think this code should work. And self.did add card is this right here. So did add card is all that. And then finally did add card is this guy on the right side there. So now add card form, it's kind of aware of this closure right here. I think we want to do that, and I think things are fine. So okay, things are looking good. And with this closure right here, I'm going to go over to the button on, let's say the top right. So let's wait for the preview to kind of go back up here. I'm going to click on the add card, right? It's going to show this form. And then with that form, there's a save button on the top right. And let's see, click on that. There's a save button right here. And that save button corresponds to this guy on the bottom, 94. And then finally, whenever I save and dismiss this entire panel, you can also say did add card, and it's an optional, so you have to use the question mark, and you need to feed in the card that you're creating. So this card comes from the card right here on line 98. And then the last thing I want to do is I'm going to go back to my main view, and let's see, I can get rid of these comments here, don't need that. Don't need that either. I think you guys pretty much know what's going on, and I'll remove that as well. And so inside of this main view, right? Whenever I'm adding a new card through this button here, I'm actually presenting it using this add card form. And the add card form, you can now create it using this bit of code. So you can pass in nil if you want to just use nil, that's fine. For the did add card, you can hit enter and you'll get access to the card that you're creating. And then finally, you can say self dot selected card hash equals card dot hash, like so. All right, so quite a bit of trickery with this code here. And I'm going to test that whenever I create a new card, right? So I'm currently selected with test. I can scroll over to that. And let's create a yellow card. And I will say yellow, so yellow card here. Finally, I'll select a yellow color just to make things easy to follow. Click on that, and then now you'll see every time you create a brand new card, right? You'll see it appear as the selected card here. And if you swipe over, you have your test, you have your new card, and then you also have your green card here. All right, I think that's gonna pretty much wrap it up for today's video. Quite a bit of code to kind of review and to check if you understand everything completely. If you have any questions, please let me know down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye. All right, hey, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back for another exciting video in the SwiftUI Core Data course today. I hope you guys are having a fantastic morning, and I hope you're ready for today's video. Now, in the last lesson, I showed you guys how to fix a couple of different bugs inside of our application right over here. And with our current code, we're now able to correctly create credit cards in the system as well as associate transactions using this button below. And this page pretty much looks like this. I can add any transaction right here, so test, and also select a photo, click on that. And we should be good to go. I hit on the save, and now we see these two transactions here and also down here. So again, nothing too bad with everything up to this point of the course. And now what I want to kind of talk about in today's section is a different type of relationship inside of core data. So you see for the transactions of our application right here, right? The transaction is actually using a one-to-many type of relationship. And the other type of relationship that you can add inside of core data is something called a many-to-many. And I'll show you exactly what that looks like inside of this application here. So this is pretty similar to what we have so far. I'm going to go ahead and hit on, let's see, add a transaction. And let's go over here and create the Sony DSLR. And this guy goes for something like $1,500. And let's say I want to add many different types of categories, or what's more commonly known as tags inside of this transaction. So let's say I want to tag this transaction as something like a electronics, and let's also click into here. So for the actual categories of this transaction, you can actually select many different types of categories. So for example, I can use vacation, and electronics, and also miscellaneous. And if I go back to this section of the form here, you see inside of the categories, I now have many different categories listed below. And if I go back to this page right here, I can also create many different, let's see, custom categories like that. Just go over here, pick on the color picker. This guy will pop out, and let's use this purple color here. Click on that. I'm going to hit the create here. And now on the very top section, right, I have custom categories. I can click on that as well. Go on the back. You'll kind of see this right here. Let's kind of go back here, and you can also delete by swiping over that, and just click on delete like so. And now this guy should disappear, but it's not disappearing. So let me just cancel out of that, hit the add transaction, click on that, and now you'll see everything is kind of looking a lot better. All right, so the first thing I want to kind of show you guys how to build out in this section is this particular page right here called categories. And again, a couple of things that you can do is create and delete categories inside of this view. And then in the next lesson, I'll show you guys how to select each one of these categories right here. So select right here, and you'll see the categories show up inside of this transaction form. So for example, I can say Sony DSLR, and let's say $14.99. Date seems okay. I'll select the photo of the Sony camera, and I'm going to hit the save like that. So the moment that you hit save, right, you'll see for the actual transaction view inside of your lists below, you can see the actual tags showing up as electronics and also vacation. And so I'll be calling these tags and categories interchangeably. So just kind of know that. Down here, we don't have any categories, so you don't see these colors showing up right here. And so again, the important part of this section that we're going to dive into is we're going to learn how to create many-to-many types of relationships inside of core data. This should be helpful for anyone that is looking to create this kind of concept inside of their application. Okay, moving on here, I'm going to go ahead and head back into this application, hit the add transaction. Again, I want to create this page right here. And currently our application has this view for the add transaction form. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to separate this many-to-many into a different section of my form. And the way to do that is to dive back into our add transaction form file. And let's kind of see where this many-to-many is right here. So this is our form file right there. And this guy, I'm just going to take this out of the section. So this has the name, the amount, and the date right there. Why don't I just cut that code, and this guy should disappear. Next up, I'm going to create a header with a content. This guy is going to be called categories like that, and enter. And just paste in that code right there, and you'll see your preview will automatically show categories and this many-to-many navigation link. Clicking into that, we get this view here with a new title and the many at the very center. So the way this is going to work is for the many to many, I'm going to change this to the select categories title. So select categories like that, and then inside of here, I'm going to create a new view that represents this destination here. And this guy, it's going to be easier if you just create a new file. So let's create this really quickly here. Let's call this the categories list view. Hopefully I've spelled that correctly. Clicking into the create, you'll see that file show up here. And once you have your file created, just hit the resume. You should see something on the right side of your Xcode editor. Once we have something listed out, we should be ready to go. And again, this categories list view is pretty much going to look like this here. And the first thing I want to start creating is some kind of list inside of my view, right? And this is going to be a lot easier if you just use a form. So let's use a form right here. And let's use a section of the header, and I'll call this the first section of, I think it has to be a text right here. So select a category like that. And for the content, just enter, and I think this should be able to render out. Why don't we just use text right here, a test. That's what I always like to use. And I think this looks okay, so that looks fine as well, and this looks good. So maybe one more brace right here. And one more brace should be able to kind of render out this section right here. So whenever I create these guys, sometimes the code doesn't always work out for the first time. So I'll enter, and let's say test right here, and hit enter. And you see, for whatever reason, the content wasn't removed in the autocomplete. So whenever that happens, you can just kind of take that code and retype it out. I noticed that sometimes I run into that problem a lot using Xcode 13, but just type it out again and you should be fine. All right, so this right here, this is going to say category. So select a category, or maybe you want to say select categories, whatever you want. And for this guy, you can start listing out some things inside of this section. I'll just have test for now. The second section is this guy right here that says create a category. And I'm just going to copy and paste that right here. And you can say create a category. And then for this, you can say something like text field. I'm just going to use the string protocol of the name right here. And this will be a state property that I'll use. The state private var and name equals this right here. While I'm up at the very top, I'll also create this color of color dot. Now let's just use red as default. And then below, just use a color picker and use this right here. Use the title of, let's say, color, and this might need to be capitalized with the name. And then finally, we have the color, like so. Let's make sure to hit the fix here. And then I'm going to go ahead and resume my project a few times. Hopefully something will show up on the right side. And you'll see with this bit of code using the form, SwiftUI is able to render out something relatively nice, like you see here. Hitting the play, you can hit the little color picker, you'll show this guy like so. And everything is looking pretty good. If you want to add a button down below, you can use a button right here. And I'll just create this really quickly. Action is this. I'll call the action handle create, which is a function I'll use below. And let's see, private function handle create, that should be fine. For the actual label, you can say text like this and create. You should see something on the right side. Command Option P to resume your preview, and you'll see something down here as a new row. And you'll see this create show up like that. If you want a button that looks like this right here, right? So create, it has a down state. The way to do that is to just modify the actual button, this label component here. I'm just going to wrap everything in an H stack like so, and let's use that right here. And let's use two spacers, and we will do that. Let's say background color blue, that looks pretty good. For this guy, you can say font, let's see, foreground color dot white, that seems to be okay. And for the, let's say padding right here, let's use vertical. I think that should work. And a value of 4, or maybe a value of 8 looks a lot better. And then finally, at the very bottom, you can say corner radius of 5. This is just some simple UI customization. And then this should be okay. I'll remove that brace. And then finally, you'll notice that whenever you create these buttons inside of a form or some kind of a list, right? If you click onto the button, you see the background actually highlights. So you see the background right here. And for this right here, you see I can only click on the button. I can click on the button like that. And the way to make this change is to use the button style of the plain button style. Once you have this style, you can see if you click onto the button, the background doesn't highlight like you saw before. So, this is a very useful little bit of a modifier to use for a form button. And hopefully you guys kind of see what that's doing. All right, so now once we have all this code, right, I would like to create some categories every time I click on this button right here. The way to do that is to enter into your core data model file again. And I'm going to create a brand new entity called a transaction category. So transaction category like that. Now, the first time I was creating my app, I actually called this category instead of transaction category. And you'll run into some problems because the word category is reserved instead of Swift and Objective-C. So try not to use the word category if you don't have to. And, in other words, we'll use the name of transaction category. So for this guy, we are going to use the name as an attribute, and we are going to store it as a string for the actual color. Color data is what I'll use, and we'll use binary data. So I'm just trying to store these categories right here as a name and the colors. So nothing too bad. You can also maybe add a timestamp if you wanted to do so. So I'm just going to add a timestamp as well. Maybe I'll use it to sort later. But that's what I'll have, and everything looks okay. All right, so the next thing I'll do is I'm going to try to create these categories every time I hit this create button, right? And before I can do that, well, the first thing you need to do is you need to actually create your transaction categories inside of your project. And the easiest way of doing that is to go inside of your Xcode menu, right? And at the very top, there's an editor, and hopefully you guys are used to this by now. I hit the create ns managed object subclass, and you'll arrive to this form modal and just hit next below. You'll have the checkbox kind of highlighted like that, and just hit the next, and you'll create these files inside of this area. Again, once you have your files created, Xcode is going to recognize this new entity, and you can just hit backspace or delete like that, and just remove these files by moving it to the trash. So that looks pretty good. Last thing I'll do is I'm going to go back to my categories list view, which again is this file here. I hit the resume, and finally I'm ready to start creating my objects. So question now is how do I start creating my categories whenever I hit this button right here? So let's just say test right here, and you want to hit create. You want to have the test show up inside of this top section. Well, first I'm going to create this guy using the why don't we pump in a context? So right here is the persistent controller. Shared container dot view context like that. And a view context, so context is below. And above here, you can simply create your category. So I'm going to say category equals my transaction category. You see this guy showing up right here in the autocomplete. Now with the transaction category showing up, just double click on this guy, open it up using the context right here, and then use the context above like so, and everything should be good. Next thing you'll do is to set up a couple of different properties on your category. I'm just going to call it name, and this you can use self.name or just name, either way is fine. Category, and you have the color data showing up like that. And then you want to generate some kind of data using self.color, which is your binding variable right above here. And the way I'm going to generate this is to use UI color. And this guy should be fairly simple. Now let's use the color right here, and let's use data like so. So why is this guy not working? Well, I'm going to go ahead, and I believe this needs a color right here. And let's see, the data encoding is not showing up. I believe it's actually in code. All right, so use UI color and encode. This method was an extension method that I provided a few lessons back. So make sure you have your extension method and you should be able to use this here. Okay, lastly, we want to make sure that we're saving these categories inside of core data. The way to do that is to simply say context and save. This guy will potentially throw an error. And, if you don't want to use the do, try, catch block, you can simply use the try here. The disadvantage is, this will hide your error. So if you want to use this, you should be fine, but make sure you're aware that there's a potential error that you're hiding using this syntax there. Okay, I think with this code, I think I'm ready to start executing a couple of different saves here. In other words, let's say the custom category of 1, hit the create here, and I should see some categories showing up above inside of this list. But obviously that's not showing up just yet because all I'm doing in the top section is using this test text. So the last thing I am going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and fetch my categories and kind of put them up here. The way to do that is very easy. If you go back to, I believe, your main view, you have the template up here that helps you use a fetch request with your environment view context. So I'm just going to copy this code and show you how easy it is to implement. So I'm going to paste that in here. We need to inject our list view with this environment variable. This guy right here, we are using, let's see, the transaction category. And if you want to order by timestamp or name, either way is fine. I'll just use the timestamp here. And then finally, the default animation is fine. This one, I'll call it the categories and the fetch result. For the generic, we are going to use transaction category like that. Okay, that looks fine. And that looks fine as well. Okay, so for the categories below, if I'm creating a category, I might as well create a timestamp as well with the current date. And that should be fine. Lastly, I want to inject the preview with the environment object. So environment with a key path of manage object context. And this guy is going to be the persistent controller. So persistent controller.shared.container.view context. Alrighty, things are looking good in terms of our code. And the last thing I want to do is for the top section right here, you just want to simply do this. So I'm going to say categories or for each on all of the categories that I'm creating. And let's use the category as my variable name. And let's say text right here and category name, and you'll coalesce it down to the empty string if there's no name. So once you have this code here, you can see your category showing up like so. You can click on that or remove the test above. And let's say test right here, create, you see it show up right here. And let's see 1, 2, 3, and that shows up there as well. One thing that you might want to do is every time you hit the create button, right, you might want to wipe out of this test 1, 2, 3 text there. So in other words, you might want to say self.name equals the empty string. Once I do that, you'll see whenever I hit the create, right? So string will be gone on create. So create right here. So that string pretty much disappears. All right, everything with our preview is looking pretty darn nice. Last thing I might want to do is for the actual color of our category here, right? I'm showing this block on the left side of the name. The way I'm doing that is I'm simply using a hstack in the actual top section. And for this guy, you can say, I'm going to pull down the data from the category.color data like so. And then you can also specify the UI color using UI color. And I believe this is going to come from the extension method of color using data. And then I can just say let color equals the color. And I believe you can just simply say the UI color here. And I believe I've using this bit of code, the color is now the handle of your color that you're picking down below. And this looks okay. This right here, I believe I need a let in front of the UI color. And down here, I think I'm good to go. Last thing you want to do is use a spacer. So let me show you how to render out that color, and we'll use color. I think that should be fine. And right here, you might want to say a spacer there. And then for this, I think I'm going to say a frame of width, let's say 30 and a height of 10, something like that. Okay, so as you can see, my block of colors is showing up inside of the top section as well as the name. And then for the spacing, you can just go to your H stack and, I don't know, use a spacing of 12, whatever you want, should be fine. And then lastly, I'm going to test whether or not I can actually create a different color. So creating this color right here, we'll use that green color. And so green category, and we'll just hit the create right here. And now we'll show the green at the very top. Okay, things are looking quite nice. And I guess to wrap up this lesson here, I might as well show you guys how to delete a particular category as well. And inside of a form for a for each loop, you can actually delete something by swiping on the left like that. And the way to enable the swipe is to go to your for each right here, right? I'm going to say on delete, so delete right here, perform, hit enter. You'll get this index set thing here. And you can go ahead and just remove that code placeholder and you should be fine. Now, once you have your on delete on your for each block here, you can now swipe onto these guys and you'll see a delete appear on the right side. And the moment that you hit delete, right, I actually want to delete these categories from my core data list. And how do I go about doing that? Well, I'm just going to go inside of this on delete here. The index set right here, it's kind of a collection, but it's actually just the index in which I'm swiping left on. And this guy, you want to say for each right here, enter, and this is the actual index inside of your set. I'm simply going to say view context.delete, and I'm going to grab the object from this categories list here. So you can say I like that, and you should be fine. Once you're done with iterating through, so iterating through this index set, you can simply say view context.save like that. Again, that potentially throws an error, but I don't really care about the error in terms of this live coding session, so I'll just use the try question mark like that. And you'll see if I try to delete this guy right here, right? Delete, that category will actually disappear. If I delete this right here, that category disappears as well. So that's pretty much how you create categories, as well as, fetching them and deleting them in one fell swoop. You see, this code is very simple and straightforward in terms of, SwiftUI code. Doing this using the old UI kit version is very complicated, and I much prefer using SwiftUI nowadays. Okay, things are looking quite nice. Last thing you might want to do is inside of your add transaction form, whenever you hit that button that says select categories, let me see that button one more time. Not really sure why, but I seem to have to hit the resume quite a few times these days. But once you see select categories, let's see, select categories. Right there, for the new title and this mini, right, it's actually coming from this guy here. So let's say I change this to categories. You'll see that right there. And for this destination, you can actually use your categories list view. So categories list view like so, and just create it like that. All right, so the next thing you might want to do is whenever you hit the select categories here, you see that for your preview, right? All of those categories that we created just now, they're not really showing up here. And let's just try to do this. I'm going to hit test right here, hit the create, and you notice that the top section is not showing any categories. And the reason why that's happening, it might be kind of tricky. What's the problem, right? Well, the problem is that whenever you're using a navigation link, it's linking your UI into a totally separate page. And by default, whenever this happens, environment variables are not passed into this page here. So in other words, you actually have to pass in your own environment variable. In other words, if you go down to the category list view here, So where am I? I'm right here. I'm going to go ahead and say environments like so, and I'm going to use the manage object context, and this guy will come from the persistent controller.shared.container.view context like so. And this is slowly starting to look very ugly, but this is the code that we have so far. If you close out of that, it looks a little better. So once you have this code inside of your application, you can now hit select categories, and you'll see all the previous categories are now showing up, and I can also create categories as well. So here is a new category. Click into the create, it'll show up like that. And then I can also delete if I swipe left, or just hit the delete like that. Going back here, select categories, you'll see everything is being persisted like you would expect. Okay, so that's it for today's very, very long lesson. If you guys have any questions, please ask me below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao. Alrighty. Hey, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back for another exciting lesson in the SwiftUI core data course today. Hope all is well in the world of Swift development, and I hope you're ready for today's video. Now, the very last lesson, I showed you guys how to create this screen right here. So inside of the add transaction form, I can go ahead and hit on select categories, and clicking on that, we're now presented with this page of categories. So up here we have categories. I can delete categories by swiping left and right. I can also create categories below. So another category, I'll just hit the create, use a different color. You know, this is pretty easy as you saw in the last lesson. Click on that, create, we'll have our category here. So pretty good stuff. And in today's video, we're going to move on from this application here. And what I want to show you guys how to do is to persist the categories that we're clicking on. And in other words, in this version of the application, right, you'll see I have the add transaction form here. Below, I can actually select the categories and bring them into this page. For example, if I click on select categories, I have electronics already checked, right? And I'll go ahead and click on that and that, and I'll hit the back, and you'll see all of my categories show up there. So this feature is pretty useful to learn how to build out, and I'll show you exactly how to do that in today's video. If I have enough time, we'll also go about saving these categories as well. So we'll see how far we get. All right, good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and go back into my category list view, and that's pretty much this page here, nothing too bad. Inside of the finished version of the application, you'll see I have a checkbox at the right side, right? The way I'm going to render out the right side check mark is to go back into my section below. Let's see, for each one of my categories, I'm using a for each and an H stack, and this spacer at the very end. Let's say text and test right here. And that's what I always like to kind of type out to see my UI render out. And instead of using this text right here, right, I want to use some kind of, let's say, blue check mark. Yes, that's how you say that word. You can use that by saying image system name and just type in check mark right here. All of these kind of images are being rendered out using SF symbols. And this guy, you might want to just say, let's see, foreground, color of black. Maybe we need that. And now it's showing up as black like so. And pretty good. I'm not really sure why we need the foreground color, but inside of this list here, it seems to be invisible if you don't have this. So just make sure to add that and you should be fine. Next thing I want to do is, let's say that every time I click on one of these guys, right, I want to either add or remove the check mark on the right side. And so the question is, how exactly do I kind of do that in my application? Well, I'm going to make use of a data structure called a set. And, let's just kind of see how to build out this set. First thing I'll do is I'm going to declare another kind of a state variable. And this state variable will be called, let's see, state var. And let's just say selected categories like so. And again, this is going to be a set. And this is going to be a set using the generic Let's use transaction category, and I'll just declare it as a kind of an empty set using this syntax there. And everything should be fine. The error does indeed go away. And now with the selected categories, what I can do is for the H stack right here that contains this entire row, I can wrap all that using a button, and I'll use the action and label. For the actual action, let's just hit enter here. For the label, what I'll do is I'm going to cut all this code and put that in here and just remove that for now. And then I'll hit Command Option P to resume my preview. And you'll see everything appears kind of in this blue color. And what I'll do is I'm going to take this here. I don't like the black color on the check mark. So, now everything is in this blue visible color. I can actually go into the text right here, and let me just use the color of the label just to make sure the dark mode is supported. And now everything looks a little better. The next thing I'll do is if I click on one of these guys, right, you see I have this down state now, and the down state is pretty much coming from this button here. And the last thing I will kind of add in terms of the code is I'm going to say selected categories dot, let's say insert the new member. And this already knows what type I'm trying to insert because of this generic here. So this is simply the category that I'm iterating over. And that looks pretty good. So selected categories, every time I press the kind of the row here, it's going to insert a category inside of my set. And whenever that happens, right, I can actually make a if check on the check mark here. Let's see, what do I want to do? Let's just say if the selected categories contains the category that I'm iterating on, which is just that right here. If that is true, then this should show the check mark. And I believe that's all the code that I need. So you see the check mark is already gone. If I click on that, you'll see the check mark appear, and appear like so. All right, and again, the reason why that's happening is because we're just inserting the category in this selected categories here, and then finally making a check right below. Hopefully that's not too hard. Next thing we have to handle is whenever we have this check mark kind of appearing, right, we can click on this again, and we would like to remove the check mark like this, and that. Some of you guys can guess how that's done already, but what I'm going to do is during the action of the button press, I'm simply going to check if the categories contains the category like that. If that's true, so let me just use the else case right here, and here. Selected categories. Let's just remove the current category, and let's see, click, and you'll see the check mark pretty much corresponds to if you've clicked on it or not. And that's pretty much how you implement this check mark behavior. All right, next thing we want to do is, so let's say we've checked all these check marks, right? Or these categories right here. And the next thing we might want to add is the ability to kind of check. And with these three categories, I want to bring it back into the add transaction form. And so how do I do that, right? Well, you see I have selected categories here as a state variable for this view. The next thing I would like to do is I'm going to go back to my add transaction form here, right? And you see I have my section that says categories, which is this bit of code. And then right below the select categories, this navigation link, I can start adding some things like text and test yet again. So every time I add this text, you'll see three different rows appear right below my categories. So the real trick here is to somehow have a mechanism that carries back all of these categories from this screen. And this mechanism is actually very, very simple inside of SwiftUI. The mechanism is actually just to introduce a binding type of variable. And that binding is going to come from this state variable. So state private var. And let's just say selected categories, like so. And again, we'll create it as the set transaction category objects like that, as an empty set like so. Next thing I'll do is I'm going to pass this selected categories as a binding to the categories list view, which is just this right here. And I'm going to do that in 2 steps. So categories list view, I'm going to inject this selected categories, and I will inject it using this guy, and I'll use the $sign and selected categories. So again, this refers to this state variable right here. And so now with selected categories defined right here, you'll see that if you click on the right side red box, it'll say that you can't really pass in this binding variable of selected categories. The reason why that's happening is because inside of categories list view, which is this file, you've defined your variable as this right here, and it's simply a state variable, which this really means that you can't really pass a binding to this guy. And this is just SwiftUI syntax. And the way to fix this is to actually make it binding instead. And I'll just do that up here, selected categories, and it'll be pretty much the same thing, but instead of using a initializer, I'm just going to declare it as a type like that. Okay, so once I do that, I believe I can go back to my add transaction form. And I'll just hit the resume. Hopefully my code is okay. I'm going to hit Command B and build one more time. This should be okay. I think this looks fine. One error that I might be having is that the preview code is a little wonky. So if you go back to categories list view and you go down to this preview right here, it's going to tell you that now the categories list view expects you to pass in this binding that I declared earlier. And for this, you can just simply say the constant value of, let's use the value of, let's say set and transaction category like that. And I believe that should be fine. So this right here, I think we need to do that, and that might be the actual value that I need. And so adding one more parentheses to close this out, all this code should be able to compile. If this looks a little scary, you can also replace this right here with .init to get your empty set, and that should be fine, and this looks a lot better. Okay, so I'm gonna go back into my add transaction form here. The next thing I will do is to make sure I can actually go to my categories, and we'll see if this actually works. I'm going to navigate to that, and that, hit the back. And so whenever I select these categories here and go back, right, I would expect those categories to show up in this list. And it's actually very easy to make them show up now. I'm going to go ahead and instead of my categories section here, you can simply use a for each loop on the selected categories. Hopefully you guys are seeing how this works by now. Text is this right here. I'm just going to use the category.name and just coalesce it down to this empty string here. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and try to resume this code, but you'll see you get this error that says that selected categories, it's a kind of a set, and it really needs to conform to this random access collection. And the reason why it's kind of telling you this is because for any type of loop that you're using a for each array on, it needs to be able to uniquely identify these elements somehow. The way to fix this is simple. Just use an array and basically transform your set into an array. Once you do that, you should be good to go here. All right, so with your array, things look fine. I'm going to select some categories, say 1, 2, and go back like that. You'll see my green category and another cat appear in this page. If I go back here, those 2 categories are selected yet again. I can click on these last 2 ones, so string and custom, and you'll see string and custom show up like so. All right, nothing too bad with this approach. The next thing I might want to do is to add the color of these categories, kind of like what we're seeing there. And that code is a little tedious to type out. So what I'll do is I'm just going to grab it straight from this chunk here. So that's pretty much these colors that you're seeing. Let's just put that in here. And I think this should be something like an H stack. All right, so an H stack, wrap that right here, and we'll take that bit of code And I think it should be fine. So I know there's a spacing of about 12. So I'll just add that here as well. Click on this guy right here. Let's click, and hit the, let's see, go back. And then we'll see all 4 of those categories show up here along with the color on the left side. Now, one thing that's a little strange right now is the ordering of everything is not exactly the same on this page versus this page here. So you see another cat appears on the second slot. It appears on the first slot here. And so one thing that you can do is right here, I believe you can say array equals, I'm just going to use the sort of this guy. And let's see if I can sort this while I'm coding. So you can use a sort right here. So let's see, type out sort, and we'll get, we'll say sorted by. And for this, the code for this is going to look a little weird. So I'm going to say 0 dot, let's use the timestamp, and we'll kind of compare this to the other item inside of our array. So this will be $1, and we'll say timestamp like that. I believe this is optional, so you have to nil coalesce it to some kind of object. And we'll just say ordered ascending like so. Okay, so once that is done, I believe I can actually take this array. So I'm going to take this array and just put it down here, and I should be all right. Okay, so I'm just going to hit Command Option E to rename this guy, and we'll just call this the sorted by timestamp categories, and that should be okay. All right, I'm going to click on this right here now, and let's say click. So AGSC is the order that I'm seeing on the left side. Go back, we should see AGSC, but this doesn't exactly seem to match. I believe this might be ordered descending, so let's say descending. Like so, and we'll try to kind of get this working. So right there, and we'll get that right. So AGSC, and that's exactly the ordering that I see on the other page. So make sure to get the ordering correctly by using something like this. The reason why I'm ordering by timestamp is because inside of the category list view, right, the fetch request is actually sorting everything by the timestamp and the ascending false. So that's kind of why everything is appearing in the same order. All right, so that's pretty much how you kind of select your categories from the add transaction form. And we can click on this, click on that, and that looks pretty good. So these categories are now showing up. Alrighty, everybody, that's going to be it for today's lesson. If you guys have any questions about the code you saw in today's video, please make sure to ask me below. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Ciao.